proposing 35% in terms of that TLT amount, but council has talked about lesser amounts. So one option that I think has been talked about is not in this meeting particularly, but in others, is to phase the revenue starting at 30% and then maybe moving to 35%, sort of to kind of demonstrate, over time their ability to effectively utilize that money. Section 11 of the contract sets the term length, the actual an outset, what would be that length of time that the city would have this contract be with the DMO. There is a strong preference stated by the starter board for 5 years, primarily because of the benefits of recruitment. And when you're hiring an executive director, most likely to be out of the area, being able to commit to that 5 years from people in the field apparently makes quite a difference as compared to a 2 or a 3 or something like that. So after the draft contract does have an automatic renewal clause in it right now, unless a party opposes in writing. And after 2 years, the city could terminate for convenience upon a 180-day written notice. Either party can terminate in the event of a default or material breach. That is similar, but just slightly different wording than what the last contract was. A few other items for you to consider today: the City Council liaison, County Commissioner liaison. I think there was pretty broad agreement on that being a non-voting member. There was early discussion about that, but this contract puts that at non-voting. The draft contract does assume only the city and the DMO as the parties. So Josephine County has made that commitment, but there's right now the way that would be handled would be a separate intergovernmental agreement between the city and Josephine County as compared to integrating Josephine County and making this a tripartite contract. The draft budget provided by the starter board does show non-specific examples of marketing expenditures. Ultimately, the executive director is going to lead that effort, and I know that Councilor Frazier in particular had some conversations or interest in hearing some specific budget numbers on that. At this point, those are really kind of running parallel to the contract itself as compared to being a part of this contract. And then draft performance metrics were included with the first contract. These would be, those really haven't changed. I think the one you got on Friday didn't have the performance metrics attached, the digital version, but we did put those on the hard copy version that you have in front of you today. So those are the same. There's really no changes. That kind of outlines those 6 or 7 specific metrics that the city would like to see from the DMO. At this point, that's a kind of a, my understanding, there hasn't been a two-way conversation other than the starter board did look at those metrics early on and said that they didn't have any significant problems with them.
Is now exiting.
So I think those are really the main highlights from the contract. Like I said, we can, however you want to handle it, Mayor, in terms of the order, we have it currently kind of slated that you would have maybe some feedback from Jeff Knapp with McMinnville, and then hear from the DMO starter board on some of these specific issues in the contract, but you could do it obviously however you want.
Thank you. Mark Bartholomew is having some issues connecting to us, so that's part of what you're hearing coming and going, but he is available by phone if we need him. Is Jeff Knapp available on Teams or?
Jeff, can you hear us okay?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you for joining.
I'm having pretty bad connectivity issues coming this way from your audio, so forgive me if I've tried to log on and off a few times, but if you can hear me and we can make it through there, that's fine. So thanks for having me.
Okay, yeah, you're coming through just fine on our end. So.
Okay. Well, great. So is this a good time to say hello and introduce myself?
Yes, please, go ahead.
All right. Hi, my name is Jeff Knapp. I'm the Executive Director for Visit McMinnville. Thanks for having me today. I wanted to first off by congratulating you guys on your grant from Travel Oregon. I just read that this morning that you got $100,000 for your park there. So congratulations. That is Oregon tourism dollars at work. Very cool. I just wanted to give you kind of a thank you for reaching out and inquiring about our contracts that we've had with our city. We've been in operation as an organization for just under 6 years. I wanted to give you a quick history of where we came from and where we're at. I think the contract is a reflection of that, and I think to understand the contract, you kind of need to understand our philosophies and kind of what the choices our city's made that allowed us to be successful. Does that sound like that would achieve what you're looking for today?
Sounds good to me, yes.
Okay, so our city about 7 years ago went out, we did not have a transient lodging tax in place. So that's a little bit different, I think, from where you're starting. And they said, let's pass a transient lodging tax. Our local businesses got together, formed a committee and worked with the city to pass a transient lodging tax. At that time, they managed to pass an 8% lodging tax, which by law, 70% of those were needed to move forward with tourism services and 30% went into the city's general fund, as you all know. They started that process off as a grant program, and after about 8 months of operating a grant program, the committee said, this isn't really they didn't feel it's the most effective bang in return for their dollars. So what they did is they went out and talked to other communities about how they would set up who they thought was successful, and they honed in on the city of Bend, just purely from the economic impact that the city of Bend had activated over the previous decade. And they ended up contracting with the CEO of Bend to actually come and kind of write a play-by-play and work with the city to form sort of those initial documents and processes by which to get up off the ground successfully. Now, I know that our community was like, well, we're not Bend, we're very different, and I couldn't agree more. But fundamentally, at the core of this plan, in hindsight, from my perspective, it is a plan by which any and everybody could potentially be successful. This world of tax revenue flowing into cities is a very political thing. It's very tricky. There's a lack of funding on all over the state right now. And understanding how to leverage those dollars effectively, our community felt like it was really important to kind of come in and get a consultant. So they paid well over $100,000 for this framework, which we've tweaked a lot, but at the root of it, it's really proven us very successful over the last 5 years. So to a tune of increasing visitor spend by 80% of dollars flowing into our community, and city revenue by 180%. So it's been extremely effective. But there's been a lot of tricky things, dealing with the understanding of what marketing, the value of marketing and PR, and having tangible measurables and proving value. We had to navigate all of that. And we did so with data, metrics, and action. And it's sort of not a quick return on your investment to see you're looking kind of a year in reverse on your actions. So having those contracts be of a lengthy enough time to really get something moving is really critical. So what they did was they went out and worked with this model. Mr. LaPlaca came in and said, hey, your board needs to be a governing board, not a managing board. You need to hire an executive director who is like this, which is where I came in. Let them run the day-to-day strategies, and you show the overall governance and thumbs up. City council, this is what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it's important. And we worked as a partner, so a true economic partner with the city. The mayor, the city council president, and the city manager sit on our board and come to every meeting as ex officio, so we are tightly connected. in those first initial years, you could tell there was a lot of, rightfully so, concerns about stewardship of those funds, but over the course of the next, the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a really successful impact. So I'm happy today to kind of answer any questions that you have about our contract, about how we operate. I have consulted, my board allows me to do this, with Newburgh most recently. Newburgh, Oregon went through a process of starting up a DMO where the chamber was running their destination marketing services over the last forever. In the last 2 years, they did a similar thing where they looked at our success, our bylaws, and our contract with the city, and took that and started an organization. And truthfully, it's not going as well as it could be. And I think that there's a lot of learning from a lot of those things. So I'm very vested in seeing tourism in Oregon, especially a cool place like Grants Pass, which you have such a great destination, be successful. So I would love to answer any questions that you have today and help as I can.
Thanks, Jeff. Who has questions? Rob?
Thanks, Jeff, for donating your time to us today. You mentioned that, and it sounds like you really have a lot of success up there, so that's really inspiring for us. You mentioned that you have experienced an 80% increase, I think you said, in like tourism spending. And I'm just wondering, other than hotel stays, how are you measuring that 80% increase?
How we measure it?
Yes.
So we invest in Dean Runyon economic impact data. So Dean Runyon, I don't know if you're familiar with that service or that organization, but they're the leaders in economic impact studies on in the tourism sphere, and we invest in that data and monitoring of visitor spending through their channels, as it was the industry standard. We're constantly looking at different data to also measure success and spending. Ultimately, we would like to invest in something like Buxton data, which is direct credit card spending data. We are just now in a position where we can start considering that. I think it's about $60,000 a year, and for us, it really, that kind of data is good to measure. It shows your value, but it's also taking away from the ability to do what our main goal is to convince people to come here and spend as much money as possible with local businesses. So our model at the beginning is we are a destination marketing organization. We have laser-like focus on one thing and one thing only. We don't issue grants, we don't throw events, we don't fund, city light parades. We are a professional marketing and communications organization that works with PR and advertising, and that primed our pump. 5 years later now, we're shifting and moving into sort of destination development because the dollars are flowing in and everyone sees the value of that. It's a little easier to understand it when you see the results of those marketing efforts. But I think I took your question and went a little further than your question.
Actually, I'm still kind of waiting for the answer. So yeah. You mentioned that you have a service that helps measure that for you. Can you tell us what some of the metrics are that service has actually shown you that would indicate that spending has gone up 80%?
The 80% number?
Correct. You said, I think, if I caught it correctly, you said that tourism spending has gone up about 80% since the DMO got started, and I understand you have a service that measures that, and I'm just wondering what it is that, other than room stays, what it is that they measure. Can you give us, several things that they're actually looking at?
Yeah, so Dean Runyon measures local tax revenue, STAR data, Airbnb data. They measure employees. They synthesize all of the Oregon employment statistics and data and so they can call those numbers out. I can send you directly the report on all of the measurements that Runyon does. If you're not familiar with their work, I'm happy to send you the report. I don't have it in front of me.
That'd be awesome. The report would be awesome. That would really help us, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've sent that ahead. I sent that on to Brad with Southern Oregon, but I can, if you give me your direct information, I can send you all of the statistics that we have.
Thanks, Jeff. Brian, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for being with us today. In your, in the beginning, you mentioned Newburgh and how they're modeling after what you guys have done there, and you said that they've been running into some issues or it's not been going as they had planned, and I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, so Newburgh got off the ground right before COVID with a process that I don't think they had, they had a turnover in city council leadership as well as city leadership. So they created an organization, and then COVID hit, and as we know, COVID has hit travel and hospitality and service the hardest and the fastest. And I think that the timing of that, paired with not having a fully supportive, educated board and then new leadership on a city level, has brought a lot of question into why tourism marketing and management is important. And with the amount of funding that they have a full-time executive director and a part-time marketing person. And their budget isn't really allowing them to. The executive director spends a lot of time politicking and trying to explain the importance of what they're doing, as opposed to the time that she could and should have, implementing and activating those dollars. So they're stuck in a little bit of a conundrum with community buy-in and support, and I have concerns that they're going to be able to I mean, it may be a personality thing too with leadership, but it's really with the leadership of that organization. I'm not sure, but I know I speak with them regularly. I meet with them quite a bit, and they're having a hard time maybe operating out of opportunity and not fear, given what's happening right now.
Great, thank you.
Rick?
Hi, Jeff. I have a question on the metrics. Do you think that should be part of the contract or just as an exhibit, which would include and spell out what the goals are and what the different expectations would be?
I'm sorry, the first part of your question is, say again?
When we're looking at the contract, should it include what the city goals are and standards, in other words, base levels of expectations? Should that actually be spelled out, and should it be in the contract or should it be as an exhibit? Because then the exhibit can change year to year.
I don't know that I would say, so I don't know how what your city goals are. Our city has an economic development strategic plan, and it calls out how we connect to that plan to achieve the overall city goals. So our contract doesn't say you're going to hit 400,000 website visits a year, or X amount. We report on those things, and at the end of the day, the city for us sets kind of high level goals, and then we report back on. Our metrics are really internal, and our boards manage those. So for instance, when we started, our tangible metrics were a blended metric of room occupancy and rate increasing year over year, because we're funded by hotels, so that was one of our goals. And then web traffic, web monitoring traffic to our website, and then from our website to other strategic partners, stakeholders in the community. And this is really important because we're not a play-to-pay organization. If we're not a...
Sounds good.
Should I keep going? So
Yes, please.
Sorry. I heard something. So our metrics have changed a bit because the playing field has changed since we started as well. So, you know, our metrics for success aren't just web traffic now. We've added things because the way that websites work are different now that Google is playing a much bigger role in, you know, in what they do. So I would encourage you to set the high level goals for the organization to, you know, help the community achieve, and I can send you what our cities are. And then, you know, the organization itself would have its own internal goals, which they would come to you each year and, you know, not pitch, but say, here's our plan for the year. And at that point, they would engage council, and council would have an opportunity to thumbs up or thumbs down.
Okay, thank you.
Joel?
So appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you taking the time. Do your marketing efforts include the use of artificial intelligence to pinpoint your target?
We do use, we are starting to use more, we're looking to invest in cell phone tracking data this year, which we already have through the Willamette Valley Visitors Association, but we will be buying that, you know, tracking where people are coming from, how long they're spending in market, where they may, you know, other places like us that they may visit, and then we can direct marketing dollars at those. We also use retargeting on the internet. So, you know, you look at a pair of shoes and then it follows you around on other websites. We have done that. So yes, a bit. I mean, we use marketing technology that's available as part of our strategy. A big part of our strategy was a highly effective PR team. And that has been invaluable to us because, you know, having other people write about you in national publications where it's much more expensive to, you know, place ads, we've seen a lot of value in return from that. So.
Thank you.
Valerie?
Yes, thank you, Jeff, for being here. Can you give me your thoughts on the fundraising aspect of your job? And also, in relate to that, if you could go back and start over, what would you do different that you have done, that you started off doing?
Those are good questions. Fundraising is not, I think, is a distraction. When we have a transient lodging tax revenue, fundraising is would be a distraction and unnecessary, in my opinion. Fundraising is a model that's proved, as far as, you know, if you're basing your revenue on fundraising, it's a fraction of the benefit of what you could do at the same time focused on a myriad of other things. So I'm not a fan or believer of fundraising. That being said, we are able to leverage funding partnerships quite effectively with grant dollars. And so when we look at fundraising, we look at effective grant submissions, and we've regularly secured $20,000 to $60,000 annually on, you know, by engaging partnerships around the state, especially with Travel Oregon, regional tourism partners, and then other, you know, we focus a lot on partnerships. Second part of your question, what would I do differently? I have to give a lot of credit to my board. They were very supportive and strong. I'm trying to think of what we would do differently. You know, one thing that I think I would have done more, which I did a good deal of, is when we got started as an organization, we made the rounds as talking to service clubs and different organizations around our town about, hey, this is who we are, this is our identity, this is who we are. We're not the chamber, we're not the economic development partnership, we're not the downtown association. This is our role and this is our opportunity. And we did that for the first year and a half. And then we just started doing, you know, we focused mostly on our job. The first year and a half was a lot of saying no. There's a lot of uncomfortable conversations, people coming to us because we had money, and us having to say, we're sorry, this is what we do, we don't do that. What I would have done differently is not assumed that after that first 2 or 3 years that everyone knew who we are and what we did, and maybe kept a tighter relationship one-on-one with our city councilors, because we were under the impression that, oh, you know, the mayor sits on our board, the city manager sits on our board, and the city council president sits on our board. You know, if we just go every little bit and talk to them, they'll understand, but and get it. But I think one of the things I would have done in hindsight is had tighter one-on-one regular conversations with my city council, for a lot of reasons. But as far as the plan itself and as how we operate it, what we do, I don't think I would change anything. In fact, I think that it's a very difficult thing to be successful doing, given, and I think that our city leadership and our board leadership was very, very supportive, and that helped very much, because it wasn't an easy lift.
Thank you.
Jeff, what is your overall budget, and what percentage of it is spent on administration versus marketing?
On what versus marketing, I'm sorry?
Just the admin costs, staff.
So we look at it a couple of ways. Can you hold 1 second? I'm very, very sorry. My sincere apologies. I'm also I'm staying home for childcare right now. So our budget's broken in, our operating expenses are about 20%, 16 to 20, depending on how we look at it. Our marketing budget's about 70%, and then the rest is in destination development. We look at, and we work with our city council to understand this, that I have a marketing person in-house whose job is, you know, 100% marketing. So we don't look at her as operating expenses. Our operating expenses are pretty low. I mean, we have rent, we have the furniture, we've got our normal bills. But that staffing position in a nonprofit, you know, is doing marketing work nonstop. So we look at her salary as marketing. So if we have someone doing G&A in our office, which we do, that portion goes into that operating income. But yeah, it's about 20% of our budget through that lens.
And what's your total annual budget?
Our annual budget this year, coming out of COVID, we're looking at about just under $900,000.
Thank you. Kurt, and then Rob.
Thanks, Jeff. If I understood correctly, you said your organization doesn't get involved in any events. Is that right?
We're involved in events, but we don't host events or throw events. So
Who does the organization for that?
who organizes local events?
Yeah.
It depends on the type of event. So we work with our downtown association, hosts and throws certain events. We've got Linfield College that does events. Our chamber does a couple events historically a year. We work with our Air and Space Museum, who hosts events. McMinimans hosts a very large event in our town. We have a car show. You know, we've got a event. So we support events by marketing and getting the word out, and drawing people to those events. We will, if an event is going to fill hotel rooms at the times when we need it, so winter and early spring, we will provide some different types of sponsorships, say for transportation services, busing, and that type of thing, or certain different supportive type investments if it's going to turn value back into hotel rooms, I guess, at that time of year. But we don't host or execute events.
Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, hi Jeff, I got two questions for you. I guess McMinnville is about the same population as Grants Pass, so I'm just curious as to so I think it kind of applies my question. What is your salary, and what kind of benefit package do you have?
My personal salary and benefits
Yeah, approximately.
currently. So I've got I think my salary is at, I think I'm around $92,000. I have a 6% match on a 401k, up to 6% match on a 401k. I have healthcare benefits, but I don't take those through the company because my wife's an educator. I have 4 weeks of paid vacation as of right now. After 5 years, it's sort of built up to that. And I do have a bonus structure plan for performance that is built on top of that as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, one of those, with your vacation time, Grants Pass is a great place to visit. Back to the 50s is really cool, so you may want to come down here some of that time. I would be remiss if I didn't put that in your ear. After the DMO was set up there, can you tell me what the role of the board became? Like right now, all we have in Grants Pass is a board, and they're doing like anything to do with the DMO. And once we have an executive director, obviously the executive director is going to do a lot. So I'm just wondering, what do you perceive as the board's role in McMinnville?
Well, it was different at the beginning than it is now, and that's something that I'm constantly working with engagement. I mean, I needed them a lot at the beginning, and in fact, they built it. They fought for it. They got it up and running. A lot of them are very intelligent. They're all of them very intelligent, type A business people that said, you know what, we're gonna work with the city because this is really important. So one of the critical things that I think made us very successful is the consultant said, listen, when your executive director comes on board, you are now moving from managing to governing, and you're going to be a bit used to really making all these conversations, or making all of these decisions, and now you're going to have to say, like, here's the steering wheel. I especially got tricky when we got, that conversation was challenging for me to have with my board when it came to things like, we're a marketing organization and we have a bunch of people around the table that fancy themselves marketers. So there was a lot of, cutting the umbilical cord, so to speak. And it was a delicate dance of respect, but it was really hard for being essentially an employee, a hired person to come in and say, look, for this to work, we really need to have sort of a separate. So we would come, how they supported us and continue to support us is in two really important ways. One, representing us in the community. What is the importance of, why is this organization important? There was a lot of, for us, it was a new thing, and there's a lot of gossip and chatter, and we had what at the time was a lot, and still is a lot of money. So there's a lot of, it's a small town. There's a lot of, so we rely on that social communication of what we're doing and why it's important. My skill set was not in deep dives. I can operate a budget, but large picture, I'm good at it now, but we needed a great finance person to help with some of that over the first couple of years to get me on track. Bigger decisions as far as I would come to the board with helping me make decisions on things that were, over a certain dollar amount. If I'm going to spend $20,000 on something, I want to make sure that, $50,000 on something that the board is on board and knows, is in full support. It's important to have like an annual retreat, I think, to say, hey, look, this is check-ins. We met. We still meet monthly. We meet monthly I have an executive board meeting and a board meeting monthly. So I think that was very helpful. Having the 3 executive team members that can really get a deep dive into what we're doing and help be in lockstep with you when you go to the full board about things. So there's some trust there. I don't know your community, so I don't know your different challenges and how a board would best serve you, but I use my board as trusted confidants and strategy, help with strategy. Actually, the biggest thing that my board did, my board president, the biggest thing that made me successful is when I got the job, granted I had lived in McMinnville for, I don't know, 8 years prior to this, but I didn't really know the deep inner workings of leadership, and my president did, and she made a list and introduced me to everybody, and made a list of like, these are the people that you need to know that are in leadership. These are sort of a strategic who's who of having meetings with, so I could get introduced to it, and then I could be much more effective with those resources. And I've seen that with leadership locally, when that doesn't happen in other roles, that they don't last very long here in McMinnville. So
Thank you.
that's a long-winded answer.
Thank you. Do we have any final questions for Jeff? Valerie?
Yes, I have a question about tourism facilities. That seems to be a big topic here as to what percentage of your budget, or if anything, is spent for tourism facilities, and what you perceive to be tourism facilities.
That's the ongoing, that's the rub for everyone in this conversation. I would say, so when we were starting out, our board was, again, 100% against anything other than marketing. We're marketing, that's what we do. And we've morphed a bit to broaden that, but after a period of time where we felt like the resources were there to do something else other than marketing. I don't know that I can answer what tourism-related facilities are. I mean, the law is fairly clear about it. We went out and did a $40,000 study on conference feasibility. So we were like, well, other communities have conference and convention centers. Maybe we should at least know if that's we're doing our due diligence for the service to investigate this. And so we did that study, and turns out that, our city, it's not the right time, and we don't have the funding to be able to execute something like that. Arguably, you could say that type of facility, I mean, not arguably, it's part of the law, could be a tourism-related facility investment. Our board and our city decided not to move forward with that because with our current assets, it would kill our travel and leisure market based on availability of hotel rooms. So we wouldn't have hotel rooms to support that. We would have to, and it was just too far of a reach. So currently, I work in tourism-related infrastructure investments through destination development in partnership with projects that I'm working with our downtown association on ensuring that people are able to find their way on foot from our downtown to our granary district. And so we have worked with them on kiosks and mapping and wayfinding signage. We also invested in wayfinding signage study with other partners around town, and organized this and got city involvement, and we invested some of our dollars into an overall wayfinding plan for the city. We aren't funding the build out of that, but we are moving projects along that have a direct potential economic impact back to local stakeholders. So for us, it's the amount of return with $500,000 of marketing dollars, the return, we can make a lot more, we can grow money to a point where we may be able to, it'd be less impactful to, I don't know, build a local public bathroom or something. So it's a sticky widget that defining what that is, and I think it's really what your community goals are and what was within the law.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Lots of good information here. I'm going to have one more question from Joel.
So I would just ask you to summarize, if you could,
the analogy from playing basketball where you play not to lose versus you play to win. So the DMO, so that it wouldn't fail, versus that the DMO has a relationship with not only the city council, but the city and their efforts to win. When you look at that contractually, what does that look like in a contract to set up the DMO to be successful, not to prevent failure?
Yeah, I think it's a big trust. It's a good question. I think that anything like this, when you're looking at dollars, especially in you're looking through the lens of stewardship of public funds, and comparing and having those be turned into the most effective return. I think it's a big trust. You know, it comes down to trust, and trust is built on clear communication and relationships. So I always say that when you're entering something, especially like the start of a DMO, is that you have to lead and be in a place of thinking about opportunity and not about fear. So set up a contract and have goals and all of the measurables, but come from it as a place of opportunity and a new, you know, you're thinking of it as a true partnership. And I think that that comes down to clear and, you know, fairly regular communication, especially in those first couple of years. I would say not, you know, to be successful with the fundings that you have, be as focused with them as possible. Once you start funding 10 different things out of this pool of funds, your ability to move the needle is extremely diluted. So, you know, in my opinion, as much money into strategic, targeted, data-driven marketing and advertising for the first, and PR for that first period of time to really prime the pump and get things going is what I would recommend, and know that things morph and evolve over time. But in order to see that return, you have to be very focused. And that is the hardest part, because most marketing and advertising and PR scare people because they don't really understand. It's the first thing to get cut out of everywhere, because it seems nebulous. So I would say if you stay focused, have great communication, lead from opportunity, and focus on getting whatever your message and goals are, what is who you are as a destination, and targeting that, I think you will see, I know you will see a return. So I guess that's and I would also say, like, if you're considering a contract, signing a contract, we started with a 3-year contract, and when the thing about the contract, and I understand from a city's point of view, I think having a clause where you can pull out if it's not working is critical. But the longer the term that you have, I had to start, for our second contract, 18 months ahead of time, spending considerable time on relationships and navigating and talking to our attorneys and board meetings and all of these things and my city loves me, it took a lot of time out of my schedule and focus that I could have been putting into building out a series of mountain bike trails or something. So in terms of contract, I would push you to look at doing something that through that lens, that that there's actual work that that the executive director will have to be doing that will pull them away from X, Y, and Z. So
Thank you very much for talking with us today and sharing your background and experience. Good advice here. I think we need to probably move on to our local DMO folks, but thanks again, Jeff, for talking with us today.
Well, thank you so much. Please, if you're ever coming up this way, it's my job to make sure you have a good time. So let me know, and I will make sure that Brad or whomever I can gets you some of that data that we've got, just so you can look over some more things. So,
Perfect.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you. All right, good information, good questions. We have Doug Bradley here from our local DMO. Did you want to talk with us about the, where we stand on this contract?
Well, yes, thank you very much, councilors and mayor, for allowing me to be here. We really wanted to hear from the DMO from McMinnville, because I think one of the things that we're missing is a way to see into the future. I don't have a crystal ball, none of you do, but I think today was the closest that we could have provided that for you. So we really wanted you to hear about the success that they've had, and a lot of the challenges that they had seem to be similar to the ones that we're having right now. So I hope everybody can take that into consideration, and kind of what he said at the end, I think kind of hit home, is there just needs to be an element of trust, which is very difficult for anybody. We have contracts because we don't want to rely on trust at the end of the day. But I do think that I heard him very clearly say, and this has kind of been my message as well, that this is the best path forward, and we just want a chance to be able to prove that. And he did indicate that having a fair amount of oversight was probably the key to that. So kind of letting go of the reins, having your oversight, and letting the DMO, the executive director, perform for the city. And that's kind of where we are right now. And at the end of the day, you know, this is a non-resident tax base to be able to use to boost the economic development of Grants Pass, Josephine County. So I'd really urge the council to consider, you know, what we can do as a team, a unit, to build the best DMO. And at the end of the day, that's going to rely on the executive director that we can lure in here to take care of our DMO and build it up to be the best that it can be. Which brings us back to, you know, the things that the sticking points on the contract have been the 30 to 35%, or the 5-year versus the 3-year, 2-year. I would just urge the council, anything that we can do to clear the path ahead for the executive director, to let them perform and do the work that we ask them to do for the good of the city is what I would ask. And he kind of indicated that those were really the key elements of what helped them be successful. Of course, they did have the stumbling blocks and different things that they had to go through along the way, which of course we will experience and we have been experiencing. So that's really about all I have, other than I would go back and say I did talk to the starter board, and our vote was to remain on the 35%, just starting out of the gate, having the money that we need to operate. And we would like to stick with that 5-year contract, renew after 2 to 3 years, whatever the contract language wanted to be there. But I do think at the end of the day, you know, like he said, you know, having to go back and renegotiate, this just takes time out of everybody's schedule to do those things. And we're a little bit behind the curve anyway. You know, we're probably looking at a 1 to 2 year period of time for an executive director to ramp our programs up and get that going as well. So those are just the considerations that I have, and I hope that you guys got the same message today that I did. So, and this is the first time I've heard this gentleman talk.
On these discussion points that we had in our earlier presentation, we were talking about $30,000 for startup costs. And what is the DMO's position on that?
Well, I had provided, again, it was an unofficial draft document, but the document that I gave was $50,000. And that's relatively accurate. $30,000 would not cover the expenses that we're looking at currently, especially if we go with the third-party hiring firm.
And has anyone discussed with the DMO this idea of a future collaboration between the Community Economic Development Committee and the DMO?
No, but I would assume that's just part of what an executive director would be interested in doing. We could put that, it is in the contract, I don't have an issue with that. That's executive director of a DMO 101, is building those collaborative relationships. And you heard him talk about that. Not just collaborative relationships with people in the city, but with Travel Oregon, Travel Southern Oregon. The collaborative process is one of the things that I think will be the big benefiter of what we're doing moving forward.
And have you had an opportunity to review the latest draft here from the city regarding the contract?
Yeah, but I have not been able to review and discuss it with the starter board at this point.
Okay. I'm just wondering if there are other specifics besides the term of the 3 years versus 5 years, or the 30% versus 35 that you're aware of that are sticking points that need to be addressed?
I don't know about the sticking points. Actually was hoping that today's presentation would take care of those. I'm not really going to be able to tell you anything that I probably already haven't. But just hearing somebody that has started the same thing we're doing 6 years ago and the success that they've achieved and how they got there and some of the things that we could kind of latch on to as far as what we could do to mimic that. I would just say that I do think that we want to stick with the 35%. And one of the big reasons is those funds have to be spent in very specific ways. And I think that our board will be very good stewards of that money and making sure that it gets spent correctly. In addition to the startup costs, we have funding for that can be used that has just kind of built up because we haven't been operating a DMO. In the 5 years, you heard him speak directly to that. The longer we can get the first term of the contract, the more time we're going to be able to spend building that momentum for our DMO, or our executive director to spend building the momentum.
Thank you. Council, do you have questions? Valerie, then Kurt, then Rick.
Well, I don't know if I have questions. I'm just going to kind of add on because
Sure.
I've been on the starter board that and I think it was referred to, I think Brad mentioned that 20,000 was the amount for the worldwide global. It was 25,000 was the amount of the money for the executive director if we were to go out beyond our community. So that right there kind of lets you know why the 30,000 doesn't really match, because we've got legal costs that we've incurred above and beyond that 25,000. So that was one thing. Another couple things I kind of want to go, and he alluded a little bit to, and that was that tourism-related facility. And if you go to OIR, whatever number it is, because I don't, whatever, but I did look it up, and tourism-related facility is defined as a conference, convention center, or visitor information center. And the other one is other improved real property that has a useful life of 10 or more years and has a substantial purpose of supporting tourism or accommodating tourist activities, which is bringing people in from more than 50 miles. So there are specific ways that needs to be spent. And that needs to be clarified, because I think I've gotten the sense that, that is, I've heard it sitting, or anything else the council decides to use. That's not how it can be used. There are specific ways it needs to be used. So I did want to bring that up, because I do think that's very important. There was one other thing I was going to bring up, but I'll let somebody else ask a question and come back with it.
Kurt?
Okay, not really a question, more of a comment. I also want to respond to Rick's question. I've said this to everybody here, I'm sure, that in all the discussions, we keep talking about wanting to get a superstar. And so I'm going to advocate strongly for the 5-year term of the contract. When I was a marketing professional, I did a damn good job. And part of it was because I had control of my product. And so I could define what I was marketing. The person we bring in will not have that luxury. They're going to have to catch up to what we're doing and learn how to present it in the right way. So also going back to what you talked about, Rick, we've got a termination for convenience clause. If I'm coming in, I want to know exactly what the objectives are being expected. I think that should be an addendum in the contract. So that's my thoughts. And also, just along with what Valerie was talking about, I guarantee I've been to more conferences than anybody else up here. It's a great way to bring people into a town, and we really need to have the wherewithal to do it. I'm not sure if the Riverside is the only thing we have for that, but it's here, so let's use it. Thanks.
Rick, is yours a question for Doug?
Yes.
Okay.
So Doug, going a little bit further, what Kurt was saying, I felt over the last 15 years, a lot of the tourism people that have been there have not had any goals and standards set by us. So the question I have for you on being on the board, it seems like your board would be an appropriate source to come up with those goals and standards. So not only for us as a council to judge whether or not the tourism, the DMO, is achieving those goals, but that he has a standard, he knows he needs to meet those, because otherwise he can say, oh, you never told me I had to do that. I mean, or, you know, to show that there was an increase in sales and so forth.
Sure.
And I realize there are certain circumstances, so and the economy changes, and that makes it hard. But I think if there's not some standard, and I don't know how you write it, I think, should it be in the contract, or would you just have it as an exhibit as part of the performance annually?
We do have an addendum draft of.
Yes. Business plan, you looked at that?
We have an exhibit that would be included. It's basically like being in the contract, so that's already being addressed
Yeah, so-
through our process. You've got the contract and then you've got the exhibit, and so that addresses that.
And I would also point out, I believe there's 4 quarterly reporting requirements for the executive director, as well as an annual audit at the very least, to keep tabs on what's going on there and making sure that we all understand what's going on. You know, as a board member, we are not going to be interested in somebody that's not performing. And if we happen to be headed down that road, we are going to be as quick as anybody to want to turn that ship and get it right. So.
Joel?
So just to make sure that I heard everything correctly, I just wanted your verification. There's really 3 things that the council needs to act on. One is the startup costs, decide the length of the contract, and then the percentage of revenue from the lodging tax. And once we finalize those 3 things, include the criteria that has been suggested, then we're good to go. So those are the 3 decision points. Did I catch that correctly?
I believe so. I'm going to look at Terry. Those 3 are pretty much it, yeah.
Okay.
Those are the 3 big ones. I think if we were to be able to take a look at some of the termination clause, we would be interested in that. However, we do understand the situation that we're putting the council in, and it's a large sum of money. You heard our speaker talk about that, and we're in the same position. You know, we do kind of understand. That's why I showed you guys kind of the lower to the upper, and I just want you guys to realize we're not really asking for the moon, but we don't also want to start from the bottom of the barrel and have to build our way up from that standpoint either.
Okay, so there's those 3 items we need to agree on. I'm not sure how we want to do that to move forward, or if you want to have a discussion or how you want to do that, Mayor. I'll rely on your judgment.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions for Doug before we move on?
I do.
Valerie and then Rob?
I actually have a question for Mark, because on this contract, they refer to 3F, and there is no 3F. And so I just kind of would like to have that spelled out, because that was, and I thought I had it here and I don't, but the 3F on the McMinnville one had to do with the 70% split. It says here on C, local transient lodging tax future uses. So that's number, let's see, what is it?
What are you looking at?
2C. So look at
Valerie,
2C.
you're looking at the
2C in the
contract?
contract, yes, and 2C of the contract. It says, and it's highlighted, it says local transient lodging tax future use project. And it goes on to talk about at mutually agreeable time, contractor and city's collaborative economic development committee will carry out a project to explore the best. So that's getting somebody to make sure that we're getting a return on our investment and involving the CEDC. And then it says in the last sentence, is this work may include consultant support. Subsequent new uses of TLT dollars will remain subject to section 3F of this agreement. There is no 3F of this agreement.
Okay.
So I just wanted to point that out.
We can look into that. Well,
Yeah.
Doug's standing here. Does anybody have a question for Doug? Rob?
And I guess it's a question for Doug and a question for council, just one of the terms of the contract. It's page 3, section 4. Other reports. The contractor will prepare and submit to the city council three progress reports each year, April, July, and October, on the business plan, clean the budget. The next sentence is the question that I have, that is something that kind of rubs me the wrong way, but these reports will contain notice of any amendments to the contractor has made to the contractor's bylaws. So to me, this would kind of indicate that the DMO can change its bylaws before the council even knows about it and has approved it or even weighed in. So to me, I don't know how you feel about it, but it would seem to me that any bylaws changes that the board may want to make should be kind of, needs to be approved by the council before it's done. Because right now, we can see your bylaws. You know, you cram up your bylaws. We all get to scrutinize it. We had some suggestions. But how do you feel about basically putting the cart and the horse in a different order there as far as changing bylaws?
Well, I feel like if that would make the council more comfortable, that would be doable. We are going to act within the realms of what's legal, and it is a board designated to run the DMO. So the board would have the ability to change and work with those bylaws. However, we're never going to have a situation, we're not in a relationship with the city council, making sure that we do what the city council would like us to do. I would be happy to consider some language in the contract if that would make you feel better. So.
Yeah, because I mean, I looked at the bylaws, and you guys can basically abolish positions, add positions. I mean, you know, you have pretty much complete autonomy. You know, whatever level we're at now, the council's probably going to feel comfortable that a broad enough section of the town has been represented on that board, but I think it needs to stay that way. I think the council needs to know before any changes along those lines are made.
We can do that, but I would remind you that the purpose of the board is to run independent of the city. But with that, it's not our intention to run ahead of anybody or make decisions that would not be in the best interest of the council or the city or the DMO.
Brian?
I just have one quick question. Jeff referenced there being a board and an executive board for their DMO. I don't recall in your bylaws, is that the same structure, or do we just have a board and no executive board?
We just have a board and no executive board. We have retained the right to appoint committees to report back to the board to handle various things. But again, that is something, if we felt it necessary, we could change down the road too. But at this point, that's how we had determined to operate.
Very good, thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions for Doug? All right, thanks for being here, Doug, and helping us with the questions. All right, council, we have some questions for ourselves to discuss. And Valerie, we'll have Mark look into what's going on with section 3F.
So I talked with Mark, that was just a leftover that we should have taken out. He modified the contract, and it's addressed in the rest of the language in the contract.
So does that final sentence need to go?
That sentence would need to go, yeah, just that last sentence.
All right, we have some questions here on the table that we need to address. 3 years versus 5 years, 30% versus 35%, startup costs. Do you want to talk about that now? Comments? We'll do Joel, then Brian.
Well, I'm okay with whatever the council comes up to a consensus. As a starting point for me, I would be okay with covering the startup costs over and beyond the $30,000. I think we need to invest to succeed, not to avoid failure. And the contract, I'm okay with the 3-year. I'm also okay with the 5-year. I do think that the first year is going to be an investment. We won't see the return on that investment for several years. One of the things that happens is somebody will do a good job and you won't know about it until 4 years later. So the longer one may make more sense. And then in terms of the amount, I would be, just personally, and I'm okay with both 30 or 35, but I would start with a 30%, and then if we wanted to increase it later on and see where that goes, I would be okay with that. So I would pay the startup costs to actually cover what was done. Sounds like it was more around 50,000, but with everybody's mask on and the muffledness in my ears, Vanessa knows better than I do. She knows what that is. And I would go with a 5-year contract, and I would go with a 30%. And I'm okay however you want to modify it.
Brian, then Valerie.
Yeah, I'd agree with Joel that I think 5 years is fine. I would also be okay with 3, but I'm okay with 5, especially since there's a termination clause in there. If we were to go with the 5, one suggestion I might have is to reduce the period from when we give notice for termination to when termination actually happens. In the current contract, it's 180 days, which is 6 months, which is extremely long. A 90 or 120 day seems more reasonable. So if we were going to go with a 5-year, I would like to see that 180 day termination come down somewhat. As far as the percentage of revenue for the DMO, everyone in this room wants the DMO to succeed. Like, none of us want the DMO to fail. But given the realities of the financial situation that we have, we're already funding certain things out of that money. And as I understand it, we only have up to 31% actually available to use. So if we somehow were going to decide to do 35%, we would have to cut other things that we're already funding. So I just want to make sure we all know that before we get too deep into the percentage conversation. So as things stand now, we have a maximum of 31% if we're not going to cut anything else. I would probably advocate for closer to maybe a 28% amount, just so it gives us a little bit of wiggle room with things the city might need to use that money for, whether it's promoting events or other unforeseen things with tourism that will come up. And I don't want the city to be to have no resources available for those things. So I would probably advocate for a 28% amount for the DMO. And then I have some contract things, but we can get into those later.
Valerie?
Well, I'm going to first say that I'm in favor of the 5-year. I will tell you that if you look under the default and breach, which is 12 in the contract, there is a 30-day. So where they do say that if there is something that you don't like about what the other person is doing, that you can give 30-day notice, and they need to show that they are writing it in that time. So that's another area. So I see 3 areas where the city could walk out. Number one, at the end of every year, they have to do an annual business plan. In that business plan, do they have to have metrics? They have to show what they've done in the past and what they're planning to do in the future. And at that point in time, you can not accept their business plan. So that's something that gives you an out right there. There's an added, as a matter of fact, we talked with the McMinnville person, and we added to their contract, notwithstanding the foregoing, after the agreement has been in effect for at least 2 years, the city may terminate this agreement for convenience upon 180 days. That was not in the McMinnville contract, so we have added that to the McMinnville contract. And there is also the default and breach. So there are 3 different ways that this contract can be ended if it's not working. But I also want to remind the board that the people who are on the board are professionals, and I think that's what we heard from Jeff as well. This is a professional organization that does professional things, and I am not a professional. I am not a marketer, and I know that. And so I'm going to leave it to the professionals who have skin in the game, because they are also bringing business back to their businesses. So I think that's a really important thing. So that's why I think the 5-year contract is important. I will also tell you that I do believe that the $50,000 is with the costs in starting up. There will be costs involved on top of, with hiring executive director. So I think $50,000 to get a good person is important. They guarantee it if you go through with the other company, that that person, if for some reason they don't work out in the year, that they will bring somebody else in. I think that's an important safeguard for the city. And then I also will say, and I'm going to go back to, you know, the email that we received regarding the 30%. I want to remind you that, once again, the 12%, the last 3% of the, that we went for against the tourism and anybody, the DMO wanting that 3%, we went for 3% to make sure that we could get 25% for the public safety, which I backed as well. But I will tell you that that really 70% other than that is supposed to be meant for promotion. And if you look at the numbers that were sent out to us, I can tell you if you break them down, there was 848,000 of that personnel from this director's salary, which would come out of that, would be Brad's working with it. But the property managed division should come out of the tourism facilities as well as the North Visitor Center. So and the only other one that should come out is $70K to the tourism division budget. So if you really look at it, if I sat down and took all of that out, you're sitting at $750,000 if you really do agree that it is their job to promote. And we heard that from him as well. It is the job of the DMO to do promotion. It is not the city's. I do believe that, you know, there are some facility costs, and I agree with that, but I think you have to look at what does the law say about those. It's not, we want money to spend for our events and what we want to do, because that is not the proper use of tourism funding. And I want to make that clear, that it is specifically cleared out in the ORS.
Did you have a preference, Valerie, on the 30 versus 35%?
Well, I would go for 35%, yes.
Brian, then Rick.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify with Valerie, those costs for the property management division and the visitor center costs, those are ongoing operating expenses, and the tourism related facilities funds are for capital expenses. So you actually can't use those funds for those line items. So I just wanted to clarify that.
That was on the email that I sent on Friday, that I believe it's $247,000 needs to be for acquisition or development of new properties.
I question that, because I would like to see where in the state code buying park land is in there. It is not in the state ordinance. That is a city municipal code that was written in, but it does not come from the state. So I would question the legality of that myself.
Adam's going to address that.
The city ordinance that originally created the designation for parks acquisition and parks development, that portion already existed. And then in about 2016, we added on that portion could also be used for tourism-related facilities, those capital expenditures for tourism-related facilities. So our ordinance incorporates both at the moment. As far as the new 70% of the new 3%, that portion is being sent to the tourism division, but has the flexibility to be spent on either tourism promotion or tourism-related facilities. So it has that flexibility. It's just starting off in the tourism division.
I would question that, because in my looking at it, that 16% that you put in for park acquisition, I can see it coming out of the 30%, the first, but I don't think it would be grandfathered in to the last 70%. That's just a legal difference in how we look at parks acquisition, but it would be interesting to see if there are other tourism, you know, McMinnville, whether he has put money into parks acquisition as part of his tourism facilities. I would question that.
It's not coming out of the most recent percentage. It's actually the entire 247 is coming from the second 2%. Or I guess it's the first 2% add-on.
The first 2%, but that's what I'm saying, it needs to come out of that funding, not anything moving forward in
It
the last
it is,
100
and I
years.
think I included the chart where you can see the 247, exactly where it comes from. It's 30% of the 2% that was added in 2008. Does that sound right? Anyway, it is confusing, but yeah, those funds are for capital projects, and anything facilities-wise, the North Visitor Center, Downtown Welcome Center, needs to be paid out of that initial 848, I think is the number. Okay, somebody else want to chime in? Rick?
Thank you for this strategic business plan that does address one of my concerns. Two other items. I would be in favor of the 50,000, the 5-year, in either 30% or 35%. And last item, on paragraph 7, it says the contractor is an independent entity and will be responsible for acquiring and maintaining real and personal property. So I just want to make sure if we decide, like for instance, if we wanted to consider the downtown visitor center and we wanted to give them an office within that building, does that phrase require them to buy the visitor center, or can we rent it out to them? I just want to make sure that leeway is in there if that's where they want to go and if that's where we want to have them.
So acquiring could be done through a lease or a rental. That's acquiring. It doesn't mean you have to purchase and have it in your name.
Okay, thank you.
Rick, I didn't catch, were you in support of 5 or 3 years?
I guess 5 years, but I could go the other way too.
Thank you. Anyone else? Vanessa?
I am also in support of a 5-year contract, along with Councilor DeLaGrange, reducing the termination clause to 90 days along with that. I am also in support of a $50,000 startup budget. It's my understanding that we do have funds from 2020 that were not spent or allocated that we could use for that. For the future use of the TLT funds, subsection 2C of the contract, I'd even like to see an invitation extended to the Tourism Advisory Committee. I think that they can play a really valuable role there. As well, for the last point, the DMO budget, paragraph 3, section D of the contract explains that the DMO will need reserves. And I believe that the city has the right to have reserves as well. So we know that a 35% investment into the DMO simply is not possible. So I would be in support of a 30% investment.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, I also agree with the startup cost. It doesn't seem like if we're going to support $25,000 to hire the headhunter, then the rest of it is just simple arithmetic. You know, it's what their costs are. So I am in support of hiring the headhunter, especially since there's a guarantee on that. But as far as the 5-year, I could be in support of that because it just seems to me, and it's almost comical to me that would really even make that much of a difference to whoever the executive director is, because there's so many outs for the city, including the annual approval of the work plan and all that other stuff. It's just really a series of 1-year contracts. So I don't know why someone would look at it differently. But if I was an executive director coming in here, I would read the contract and say, this is a series of 1-year contracts. We could call it a lifetime contract. It may a 100-year contract. What difference does it make? Every year we still have to, justify what we're doing. So I, in a certain sense, it doesn't even matter how many years. And I'd be surprised if an executive director would even care about that because the city has so many outs. But as far as the percentage goes, some of the things that I'm concerned with, I basically agree with what Brian was saying. We've got so many uncertainties right now. We've got, let's say, on Back to the 50s, which is an event that everyone in the city seems to love, wants to see continue. I think this council and any future council would probably always support somehow making Back to the 50s happen. So this year, we've got the fairgrounds doing it, and they have no idea how it's going to turn out for them. We have no idea how it's going to turn out for them. And at the end of the event, they could say, we lost our shirt. We can't do that again without serious financial help from the city. And, you know, as counselors, we're never, you know, it's really unlikely that we would ever turn our back on that event. That's just one example. So especially since it's a new organization that's handling it this year, we can't have any idea how much that's going to, hopefully it's not going to cost the city anything. Hopefully they're going to make enough, you know, selling concessions and everything else that it's not going to cost the city anything. We don't know that. We have no idea. So we have to, I think, as stewards of the public interest, we need to basically keep that in mind. You could say the same thing for Art Along the Rogue. It's not as ubiquitously appreciated as Back to the 50s, but still it's a big event. It is successful. And any other future events that may come up. You know, at one point the Balloon Fest was the up and coming thing, but without some money, the city council can't really support any new events either. So, you know, to me, out of the, what I believe, I think Brian's figure is really accurate, and I guess the 31% is the actual cap that we could even consider doing. And because I'd like to see some reserve there, I would also agree that the 28% in that ballpark makes a lot more sense. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that in addition to the money that the council is going to provide, I think the county said they're going to throw in $50,000 to this process. So whatever figure we come up with, it's actually plus 50, because the county is also going to contribute. And, you know, Jeff made it real clear on the phone, and every conversation that I've had with anyone to do with our DMO has made it really clear they want nothing to do with events. They want nothing to do with being, because I know the other day, I was speaking with Aaron, he suggested that, well, maybe the DMO could be the reserve, you know, could come up with a reserve for the events. And, you know, it was a reasonable suggestion, but they've made it real clear they don't want to be in that position. Jeff Knapp made it real clear on the phone that McMinnville's DMO doesn't want to be in that position. So we can't rely on the DMO to help our events if they do need some money in the future. So that that's really on the council. And as far as, you know, tourism goes, you know, I think everyone kind of agrees that, you know, flower baskets are really tourism related. What part of that budget it comes out of, I don't know. Of course, running the Downtown Visitor Center, and we were going to actually talk about whether we were trying to get a figure from Josie, what she felt she needed to potentially take over that. We don't, I think, have that figure yet. I also feel that some kind of graffiti removal team is really part of tourism, because you don't want a big event coming into town, seeing a swastika on the side of, you know, the kitchen company or any other mural in town. And I think that that's something that we need to have as kind of a tourism related process. But the other thing that I wanted to just bring up, because I know there's talk about it, and DMO Pros talked about it, and also Jeff just mentioned it also, and he kind of agreed with DMO Pros. And it's very interesting. It's kind of a looser interpretation of what some people would look at some of the state ORS on this. What DMO Pros said was that something like, you know, the Christmas tree lighting, it was on page 35 of their report for anyone who wants to know, something like the Christmas tree lighting and things of that nature comes at a time of year in which local lodging, restaurateurs, and retailers need business, and as a result would likely qualify as appropriate for TLT funding. Further, you know, this definition has come under considerable debate around the country over the past decade, with many believing that a day trip can be viewed as a precursor to future overnight stays and thus would qualify as a destination marketing strategy. And Jeff also said something like that if things were happening at a time of year when it was slow. I think he mentioned January, February, March. And he basically said that he felt that the definition of what's appropriate for TLT funding gets expanded at, or it's appropriate to expand that at a time of year when, you know, hotels would normally be slow. So you know, I don't think that that concept is as black and white as many would like it to believe. DMO pros and also Jeff indicated there's some gray area there as far as what would be considered appropriate uses for that money. But I'm again, to recap, I guess the 50,000 makes sense because to me that's basically just the arithmetic of what it's going to cost. I also think that the arithmetic of what it takes for us to have a reasonable reserve to make sure that we could potentially help events in the future if they need it. I think that that comes down to somewhere below 31%. It could be the 28% that, that Brian mentioned. And then the terms of the contract, if we brought down that 180-day down to 120 or 90, I mean, I'd be okay with the 5-year. And again, because it's really just a series of 1-year contracts. Thanks.
All right, DJ?
Let's see, so the 50,000 startup I think is a fair ask. It's great to see we all agree on that. I would spring for a 3-year contract and with a 28% contribution. By my little napkin math, that'll leave the city about $65,000 buffer that I at least desire for the city to have, and then considering the potential contribution from the commissioners are going to bring the DMO pretty close to where they want, and there's language to reevaluate in this contract. So 50,000 startup, 3-year, 28% contribution is my input.
All right, so we've heard strong support for a 5-year contract as well as contributing the 50,000 for startup costs, but we seem a little bit split here on 28 versus 30 or so. Valerie?
I just want to bring up one of the things that we heard was the amount of money that the DMO will be spending, and if you look, they do spend on research, you know, looking for things to bring people in during the fall and spring. I mean, that is a part of their job, is to try to bring this and things in. So that research takes time and money. And when he was talking about even the measuring and having the measuring part, you know, you're talking, you know, of course, 60,000 right there for the analysis of and that's an annual cost. So I think you need to remember that not only are they just marketing, but they're also researching and actively going out and looking at what will bring things in during those times. And that takes time and that takes money. And so that's why I do not feel comfortable at all at 20%. I do not think you're taking into consideration those things and those costs that include doing a professional job, and I think it comes to the same thing. You get what you pay for, and I think we heard that from Jeff, we heard it from DMO pros, that you need to invest. You need to believe in the professionalism of the DMO. You need to believe that they are out there researching and doing everything they can, bring those in, and they're not opposed to, and I would agree with that, Rob, they're not opposed to, especially in shoulder seasons, doing things. You talked about, one of the things you talked about is incentivizing, you know, busing and sorts of things to bring people in during those hours. So they're willing to do that. But I think, once again, you need to look at who are the professionals who know what to do. It's not us, it's them. And so I think you need to give them more than 28%, because I think that's running too lean. And so I would vote, I'd go for 31 at least.
Thank you. Brian?
With regards to the DMO running lean at 28%, 28% would give them $593,000 from us. It would give them $50,000 from the county, which is $643,000 total. And then, as Jeff mentioned, they get anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 a year in grants. I would assume that we may not get that right away since we're ramping up, but I think, you know, maybe year 2, 3, we could realistically expect those things to start to happen too, which would give the DMO a budget of close to $700,000 a year. I don't think $700,000 a year is in any way hamstringing the DMO and their ability to do their job. Giving them 31% or even 30% would hamstring the city's ability to be flexible and to take on things that we may or may not need to, whether it's events, whether it's other things that come up related to tourism that the DMO doesn't want to do or doesn't fall into facilities. I think it's prudent just to have a little bit of a buffer in the city's account for things that may come up. And then if that builds up over the years and we don't spend it, you know, it should get allocated to the DMO into facilities. But I think to not position ourselves to have any sort of reserve wouldn't be wise.
All right, let's just go around the room and say if you're interested in 28 or 30. Somebody want to go first? I mean, Brian and Valerie have already spoken. Joel?
I would stick with the 30.
Thank you. Rick?
I'll go with 28.
Kurt?
I'll go with 28.
DJ?
28.
Vanessa?
28.
And Rob?
28.
All right, so at this point, we are leaning towards a 5-year contract with $50,000 for startup and 28% of the total tourism lodging tax dollars going towards the DMO. We had a couple other things that have been brought up. We have a termination clause. A couple people mentioned an interest in changing that from 180 days to 90 days. Is that correct? In section 11? Was that Vanessa? I think you had mentioned that. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so let's just do the same thing, I guess, if 90 days versus 180 on that. So Vanessa's on a 90. Okay, Rob?
Yes.
I just had a question on that. So we have, I'm trying to remember somewhere in the contract, there's like a 30-day termination for no cause or for cause or something like that. And then the either side could remedy that potentially. So that's one kind of termination. So this second kind of termination, how is that exactly described or defined?
Well, I think it provides you an action if you think that just the DMO and the city are no longer aligned and you just like to do something different and you have that ability, so.
Do you want to think about it for a minute?
Oh, no,
Rob?
so I'm well, either 90 or 120, but I think that 180 is longer than it needs to go. But are you asking for a decision between 90 and 120?
Yep, just a preference so that we can amend the contract.
I could go with either, but 120 is fine. I could go with either.
120, not 180. It says 180 right now.
So 120 would be, yeah,
That's
the
your-
maximum I think it should be, but 90 would also work for me.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah, either 90 or 120 is good for me.
Joel?
I'm okay with either one.
120 or 90, are you okay with 180?
Actually, I would be okay with 120 or 180, either one.
Okay. Rick?
My preference is 90 or 120.
Okay. Valerie?
My preference is 120 or 180.
Okay, Kurt?
When I first saw 180, I was a little heart-stopped, but I'm okay with 90.
90, okay. And DJ?
120 is just fine.
All right, we've got a preference here with 6 counselors in favor of 120. Were there any other items we needed to address? I think Brian maybe had something. Go, Brian.
Yeah. So on section 3D of the contract, which is page 3. So section D, it talks about the contractor's annual budget and the reserve fund. But if you go down to the bottom of that paragraph, it says, however, nothing in this section precludes the contractor using funds secured from sources other than the city in the contractor's complete and total discretion. So basically, I'm assuming that's saying, you know, whether they get grant money or private investment or wherever the funds come from, they have complete and total discretion over how those funds are used. And I'm largely in agreement with that, but I think maybe just having a little bit more detail about having complete and total discretion as it relates to the tourism goals of the DMO or to the tourism goals of the city and the county, as opposed to complete and total discretion, which, you know, probably wouldn't get construed in a bad way, but I think that could be, that detail might help make me feel a little bit more comfortable with that sentences.
Rick?
I also endorse what Brian said. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Rob?
And yeah, I think that's a good catch, Brian. There's two points. One really probably a very minor point, but in fairness to the DMO, there's a clause in here about the city asking for a written request of records and so forth, and it says, it's page 6, section 10. It says, within 72 hours of a written request by the city, the contractor will make records relating to income and expenditures available, et cetera. I just think that should be changed to 3 days rather than 72 hours, because it could be a 4:59 on a Friday on a 3-day weekend, and now 3 days comes up and we still haven't even had a business day. So I think it should be changed to 3 business days rather than 72 hours. It just is more fair to the DMO. But the other thing too is, last meeting we had, I think Doug had mentioned, because I was concerned with having 2 representatives from the historic downtown on the board, and I think last meeting he said that they were going to meet this past Friday potentially and change their bylaws. So I'm wondering how that turned out, and has that been accomplished?
We did pass a motion to amend the bylaws to include representatives from historic downtown.
Okay, I'm sorry, so how many?
One, I believe, will be from historic downtown.
1, yeah. Yeah, I actually personally was looking for 2, because the downtown is by far the biggest player in this whole thing. Obviously, everyone else is very important, but as far as the amount of money that ends up circulating through our town that first goes into the downtown from tourists is by far, that's the biggest number, whether it's $30–40 million a year in payroll that gets circulated back around. So to me, 1 is really not a lot of representation for such a big driver of our tourism.
Do we have other points with the contract to address? Okay. All right, well, I think we have some good direction here on amendments that we need to make. I think the 3 business days was a very good point there. We don't need 72 hours. As far as the negotiating with their bylaws and positions, does anyone want to support another person exclusively from the downtown being on the board of the DMO? Is that a deal breaker for anyone? DJ?
I want to support Rob's sentiment about the downtown representation. I think that's really important. I perceive that to be more inclusive of what's important for the city. And if we had that, I honestly, after all this work, I would leave it be.
Vanessa?
I also support Councilor Pell's request.
Joel?
So that is part of, that's not part of the contract. That's a board matter dealing with the bylaws.
Yes.
And so as long as we're dealing with the contract today, that doesn't need to be part of the contract. That can be some feedback to the committee for the bylaws, and then they can take action on it.
It would not be part of the contract, but I think if that's a deal breaker that we're not going to move forward, if they don't have 2 downtown representatives, we need to tell them sooner than later.
Yeah, and you know, I don't see it as an adversary relationship. I see it as a trusting relationship where we give them that feedback, and that's what they do.
Valerie?
Thank you, Joel, and I would agree with that. I think it comes down to trust, and if you're really going to trust, I think you just have to leave it as it is and let the board make those decisions, because it's pretty clear they're an independent board, and they should be able to act that way. I think it crosses that line in meddling, and I don't want to start off that way. Trust.
I don't want us to get to the point where we're signing a contract and then raising that issue, so that's why I'm making you make a decision today. Rick?
Well, I'd be fully supportive of a minimum of one, but whether we need to add a second one in there, I don't know. Thank you.
Kurt?
I guess, I don't have a strong feeling either way, so
Okay.
I'm going to punt.
Brian?
I don't see any downside to having a second downtown person on the board. And obviously, the board is independent, and we would just be making a recommendation to them.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else on this topic? Rob?
So getting back again to the bylaws, I just want to be clear that in order for me to have a higher level of trust, bylaws changes need to be represented and given to the council before they are made. I think being able to change the bylaws and then informing the council after the fact, I think it could be problematic. And yet we all, I think in this room, clearly trust the people that we already know are on the board. We trust them as of this date. Hopefully they trust the council that's here. That doesn't mean that's going to be the same in a year or 3 years or anything like that. So basically, it's, it's a situation where we need to get past the personalities and the fact that we trust each other today. We also need to know that in the future, we've got some foundation there to make it a lot easier for future boards and future councils to trust each other. And I think not being able to, having to communicate to council that the bylaw, that they're considering changing bylaws before it happens, I think is important, and hearing what the council has to say about that, listening to the justification. Council may be fine with it, but listening to the justification. And so I feel that will enable more trust in the future. I also feel that having two people on the board, because I mean, there's going to be, 11 or 15 board members? So I think we're not talking about 6 board members here and asking for a third of them to be from the historic downtown. We're asking for probably a 5th or a 7th of them to be from the historic downtown. And I don't feel that that is in any way, shape, or form an excessive ask or demand.
Okay, well, what is the council's preference on alerting? This is from page 3, section 4, alerting the city prior to making any changes in the bylaws. Whereas right now it says that they would notice us if any bylaws, any changes had been made. Do you want notification in advance that they're considering? Joel?
You know, to have a contract that spells out everything minutely, so, and tries to prevent every failure. You have the termination clause, you have things if they go south, you have communication that's ongoing. You're not going to have a contract that covers every issue. So I'm going to vote no.
Rick?
I'm not voting. I'm going to say no.
I just think out of politeness and coordination between the council and the board, it would be appropriate to be notified, yes.
Valerie?
Well, I think it gets down to fear versus opportunity, and I just really think April, July, October, or I think we're meeting in February, I cannot see something happening, and once again, I think that power needs to be with the board, so I would say no, I do not think we need to change it.
Kurt?
I think it's just good common sense that they discuss any changes with us and receive our comments, so I would say yes.
TJ?
Whereas the logic is sound, I don't think it applies to this specific instance between client and contractor. we're gonna have a liaison there from council that's gonna keep us posted on all their meetings and intentions. And I think, in all fairness, we need to respect that client contractor role, so I don't think it's necessary.
Vanessa?
I support this provision. Today, when Jeff was talking, he made it clear it was instrumental for the city council and the DMO board to have a tight-knit relationship and to communicate with each other. And I think that this would just further facilitate that relationship.
And Brian?
I would support a change on that.
All righty.
Mayor?
Yes.
Mark and I have been talking, there is some concern with the tightening of the contract in having a perceived oversight of their bylaws versus the way it's done right now. This should be a totally independent board. And by the contract language stating that any potential changes need to go to council for review, in essence, is really not making them a truly independent board. And that is a concern from a legal perspective. So just from a standpoint of they are supposed to be independent.
Brian, then Vanessa, then Rick?
I don't imagine this change giving council any sort of oversight authority. I see it more as a courtesy, and the DMO maybe wanting to know council's opinion on the change of the bylaws. We obviously wouldn't have any ability to affect whether or not they make that change in their bylaws, but just in the interest of transparency and the working relationship, it seems like a good idea.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I don't think that this would necessarily be for the council to have any authority over decision-making. It would just be an opportunity for the council to provide a recommendation to the DMO board, very similar to what the Urban Area Planning Commission does for the city council. They're able to review hearings and provide us with their recommendation with no authority over that.
Rick?
Rob made the mention, people change and the board will change and the council will change and so forth. So right now where we may have that good trust and working relationship, if the new board for DMO were to go off on a tangent that the council didn't agree with, what authority do we have at that point?
Your regulation of the DMO is through the contract, not through their bylaws. And so the performance is all built into the contract, and so the language that we've looked at and we've reviewed today is what you hold the DMO accountable for.
So if the DMO board went off the cliff, there are provisions within that protect us as a council?
Off a cliff is very broad and subjective. So I don't know if I can answer that for you, Counselor, but I can tell you if the DMO was not performing to the standards that you've defined in the contract, then you could execute whatever you'd like to try to correct that and modify it.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
So to me, this is really simple. When it says these quarterly reports will contain notice of any amendments to the bylaws, I mean, if at that point that's a problem for the council, wouldn't it have been a lot smarter for the board to have gotten the council's opinion before and give the justification before, hear what the council's opinion might be and why before they make that unilateral move? To me, that would potentially prevent problems and legal problems and termination clauses from even being discussed in the future.
No, I guess the question is, does that need to be part of the contract, or is that just part of good relations?
Okay, so the fact that it's in the contract now, and it is in the contract now, it says that they will let the council know after they've made the change. Well, that's after a possible bone of contention has happened. So if it's going to be in the contract that they're going to do it after, it makes, to me, eminent sense to have it be done before there could be any bad will or any problems. It just gets worked out before there's a potential problem. I mean, that to me is really, and the fact that it's in the contract now to say that essentially, we will not let you know beforehand, we'll do it after, well, it's already there, but I just don't agree with that clause in the contract. I think it could be modified.
Well, I'll just let you all know that your city attorney is arguing against making this change. However, he's not present in the room today, so I think we'll just go forward with the advice that we have right now, that you're interested in changing it, and we can modify it again once Mark is available to talk with us. Do we have anything else that we need to cover today? All right. Let's move on. Good discussion. Took much longer than anticipated, but we covered a lot of ground there. We have some people waiting in the wings to talk to us about tennis and pickleball.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Wendy Giordano, the Park Superintendent. Along with me today, I should have on my screen, is Susan Jenkins. She's the Parks Advisory Committee Chair, and we're here today to revisit the MOU that's been discussed in the past about converting some of our courts to dedicated pickleball. So again, we'll discuss the memorandum of understanding that was developed between the Tennis Association and the Pickleball Club. The relationship to council goals are to maintain, operate, and expand our infrastructure to meet community needs. Pickleball is a fast-growing sport, gaining in popularity across the United States. Due to the soaring popularity, many parks and recreation departments have added pickleball. In 2016, the city built 3 new dedicated pickleball courts at Fruitdale Park. And over the years, the Pickleball Club has striped several of our tennis courts to be multi-use, so tennis or pickleball could be played there. And those courts currently are at Long Ridge, Morrison, Westholm, and Redwood. So all of our acrylic surfaced courts in the city are in need of repair and resurfacing. The typical age is 5 to 7, every 5 to 7 years they should be reacryliced. And we do not even have records on some of these. That's how far back we're going for the work that needs to be done. And through this process, the courts at Long Ridge and Reinhardt were identified as top priorities. You have recently made a decision on what to do at Long Ridge, so we're going to just talk about the rest of the courts and a new idea that Susan has worked with the Pickleball Club to address tennis at Reinhardt. So just going back a little bit, the PAC did recommend adopting the MOU as a guide for resurfacing, and Westholm and Long Ridge were not mentioned in this agreement, so they added Westholm should be dedicated to tennis and Long Ridge to pickleball. And the MOU has been presented to council in the past, along with some estimated costs for converting and resurfacing. Back in March, I presented a plan that would be a slight alteration from the MOU, which would retain 1 tennis court at Reinhardt Park instead of replacing all of them. And like I mentioned, council has already directed staff to move forward with a plan for 2 pickleball courts to replace the current court at Long Ridge. So under the proposed MOU, pickleball courts would be designated at Redwood Park, Reinhardt, Fruitdale, which is already dedicated to pickleball, and then tennis courts would be designated at Eckstein, Gilbert Creek, and Morrison. Eckstein and Gilbert are not multi-use currently. Morrison has been striped for multi-use. So at Reinhardt, while the tennis courts aren't reserved on a regular basis for our clubs or teams, they are frequently used by the general public. And basketball at Reinhardt is also popular, but 2 of the 4 courts are experience much lighter use than the 2 that are closest to the park office. And so there's an option of converting those into pickleball. So this is a plan that Susan worked with the Pickleball Club on. Instead of converting the entire 3 tennis courts, there would be recreational size pickleball courts replacing the 2 tennis in the tennis area. That's to the right of your screen. And then in the center where there's 2 basketball courts, they would love to see 3 tournament size pickleball courts kind of pushed to the north just a little bit so that spectators could gather, or down the road potentially a bleacher could be put in that spot. And then also at Reinhardt, we see very infrequent use of our horseshoe area, so future expansion could be in that upper area. So this is what the original MOU looks like. It's taking all of the tennis courts out of service and replacing them with pickleball. So this is a breakdown of the costs that I've presented to you before, with 1 alteration, the Lawn Ridge cost. We are still working on getting an engineer's estimate on, since we are going to replace that existing tennis court with surfacing with 2 pickleball courts. And that would be a complete tear out and rebuild because of the condition of the asphalt there. So the revenue source would come from our LB 6189 existing park and sports facility rehab and improvements. The estimated ending balance as of this year would be just shy of $800,000. So the ballpark figure on the court conversions is right around $434,000, and staff resources. So your call to action is at your discretion. You can move this to a council business meeting or consent calendar, move to an additional workshop, instruct staff to proceed with the co-op pricing or an RFP for specific courts or parks based on the alternatives below. So the alternatives are to acknowledge the MOU as a guide for resurfacing and conversions, along with the PAC recommendation to dedicate Westholme to tennis. So this could be done through a motion or more formally by resolution. Another alternative is adopting the MOU as written by approving a resolution to proceed with the court facility changes, which would eliminate all tennis courts at Reinhardt. And furthermore, to dig down a little bit deeper on the Reinhardt Park options, there's option A that I just presented that was just recently developed between our PAC chair and the Pickleball Club to convert 2 tennis courts and 2 of the basketball courts to the tournament and recreational use size courts. Option B, which comes from the original MOU, to convert all 3 tennis courts to 10 pickleball courts. Option C, do not convert the courts and just resurface as is at Reinhardt. Or any plan in between that you would like to see happen. So with that, I am happy to answer any of your questions, and Susan is here as well, and she can speak to anything that I can't.
Thank you. I think, Susan, do you have any comments to add before we open it up to questions?
I would just add that for the, no, I'm not sure which plan A, option A up there, I did talk with the pickleball side of things, because the tennis clubs that were part of the MOU, they were ready to give up all the tennis courts. So I didn't go back and consult with tennis, because it's actually a gain for tennis beyond the MOU. So I just wanted to let you know that that's why I was just talking to the pickleball side of things, because that was the part that needed reconfiguring. And then after hearing all the tourism, the point of this plan, it's the hopes for the pickleball clubs to have 2 tournaments a year, a fall and a spring tournament. They've done 2 tournaments, both very small because of the facilities. Other tournaments around Oregon that were listed for me from the background and the people that do that, they have been on facilities with 8 courts. And just a month or so ago, there was a tournament here on 2 courts. So much smaller than what they think they could be doing, and many fewer people than they think they could be bringing in. But if there was a facility change, then that would help. So that kind of pairs up with that tourism side of things as well.
And does the Parks Advisory have a specific recommendation?
We heard the original MOU and we felt comfortable with that as a roadmap. And then we heard from staff on the Reinhardt, and the idea of leaving a tennis court made sense to us. We ended up kind of split, wanting to, because we had accepted the MOU, we felt like we wanted to respect the work that those 2 groups had done. But we also understood, especially at Reinhardt, which was called the All Sports Park, that flexibility is good. So we were kind of split on that. And then that's why I went out and tried to do some work and make sure that the communities that had put the MOU together would be okay if we, went forward in a little different way. But we appreciated the roadmap from those groups, not feeling like it had to be an absolute plan, but it helped us know what they were hoping for or and how they wanted to split the courts. What we had learned was the sharing of courts is not being seen as a positive by either group right now. Okay.
Okay. And do we have questions? Joel had his hand up. Nope. Valerie?
Yeah. I have a question between the difference between a recreational sized pickleball court and the tournament sized. And I know you were talking from the tourism perspective is
Yes.
that you want to be able to bring tournaments into town, which I think is a glorious idea.
So apparently, the most advanced players are the ones that would want the larger court size. The court itself is, the playing area is the same, but it's the apron around that changes. And so the more advanced players play further off that court. So coming up with this plan, what we felt was adding 9 courts to the city would help the large number of pickleball players have recreational play. But the addition, being able to use those basketball courts for 3 tournament-sized courts would make the tournament more attractive. All those courts could be used for a tournament, and then it would be up to the organizers, but the more advanced players could play on the larger apron courts, and that would give that option. When I talked to Jack Davis, as far as the tournaments around the state, and he was one of the main people with the pickleball MOU that met with the tennis people. He said that sometimes they are just recreational courts that the tournaments are being held on, but it would be great to be able to offer this with some larger courts as well.
How about the courts at Fruitdale? Are they recreational?
They're very tight.
Well, they are very tight. Okay. So this would kind of like be the finals place that you could have the finals. So, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that information.
Other questions? Rick?
Wendy, can you go back to the slide that shows the condition of the courts? I support the proposals that are being made, but just for a point of education for me. Of course, I realize the photo on the right, that court is not in very good condition, so you're not able to fill the cracks and just put a light layer and repaint it. It actually has, I'm interpreting that you probably rip out the asphalt and put in new asphalt, or how does that work on the repair?
The expert from Bainon Sports came out and evaluated all of our courts and actually said that he felt like they could fill that and re-acrylic over it, that it did not require a tear out. But what I should add is resurfacing courts does not guarantee they're not going to crack again. They have a lifespan. Asphalt, I spoke quite at length at a capital project manager out of Portland, and they recommend tearing out asphalt at 20 years because it just gets to a point where it deteriorates so much that it cracks and you're kind of throwing good money at bad. But we're not in a position to tear out all of our courts. So I think at least bringing them up to a better condition for the next several years is a great start.
Thank you.
DJ?
Yeah, a couple clarifications. So just Valerie asked at the end, we currently do not have any tournament-sized pickleball courts.
Correct.
And so theoretically, the only we would have is the 3 proposed at Reinhardt.
Yes.
Okay. Has there been any investigation into the usage of those basketball courts officially? I frequent that park a lot, and there's people playing basketball there for a lot. So taking away basketball courts for pickleball courts, albeit beneficial for tournaments, I'd like to know kind of the official usage comparison.
Since my office is right next to these courts, I see the 2 courts that are closest to the office very heavily used for basketball. And basketball is very popular, and it's a sport that a kid can just go out and play by themselves. They don't even have to have another player. And it's, one of my goals is always, getting youth off screens, getting them outdoors and being active. So there has not been any formal outreach with basketball on this potential project. We do have basketball that's going to be retained in several other of our parks, and hopefully one day down the road, Beacon Hill Park will be built, and there's a plan for us. The size at Long Ridge is really popular. People love to play that small 2 basket court. So I think maybe adding that in the future, or potentially other places would be a great addition. But no, to answer your question, there has not been any formal outreach. It's just been staff observations that typically those 2 courts that are closest to the parking area are the ones that are used, and the ones in the middle, while they do get use, is much lighter.
Sure. No, that's sufficient. It's actually in line with my observation as well, as those heavily used closer to the office there. So I think I really like the idea of, since that's sort of the all sports park, to have tennis still be there. But I do see that potential conflict between, we have 6 courts, pickleball directly adjacent to tennis. People are playing pickleball. You can't play tennis here because we're occupying. Has there been any thought about that? Maybe a chain link fence that goes between the courts or something like that, to show that these are separate court areas that can be used at the same time?
Yeah, so that was some of the hesitation on sharing this. And as far as a fence going there, it's pretty tight. And so then you definitely narrow the apron when you split it with a fence. So currently there's no fence on the plan there. It's also felt that the tennis clubs don't play there. So it's recreational use. It's the neighborhood use that uses that tennis court. And we felt like there could be plenty of cooperation just with polite court use. And if there was a tournament going on, that could always be advertised ahead or noted there so people would know it may not be the best time to come play tennis the twice a year when there would be a tournament. Otherwise, it would just be recreational tennis and recreational pickleball sharing that space. And we figure that can happen fine.
Other questions? Brian?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the slide that has the costs for the resurfacing. In total, we've got, well, including pickleball equipment for this topic, we have $434,000. I would assume 382 would come out of, deferred maintenance account. The first question is, what kind of timeline is the city looking at for getting all this work done? Is this like a 1-year project, a 3-year project? Do you have any idea of how long it would take to get all those courts resurfaced?
Thank you for that question. I actually just spoke to the Bainon sports rep this morning, just checking in with him to see what their book of work looks like, because contractors are busy right now, and there's lots of funding coming in for outdoor recreational use. facilities, but he said that if the council makes a decision to move forward, I mean, he could get a call in between this morning and now, but that potentially they could come out and get the work done in September. And I should also add that these prices are likely to come down from what you're seeing here because a lot of the cost is mobilization. We do not have a local contractor that does acrylic surfacing. The standard for Oregon is Bain-on Swartz. Ashland uses them. You know, everybody that I've talked to that's happy with their surfacing has used Bain-on Swartz, and they do offer the co-op pricing. If you're not familiar with co-op pricing, it's a process where we don't have to go out for a formal RFP. There's already been pre-negotiated discounted pricing based on nationwide bidding for this type of work. So he did say that the prices here are if you're picking and choosing, and then it's likely if you make a decision to move forward with all of the courts, and this I should say also includes our basketball courts, and adding acrylic to redwood because it's currently just a asphalt surface. So that would make that your formal, you know, nice court surfacing.
Okay, thanks. I have a second question. That $382,000 coming out of the deferred maintenance budget, I know that's a significant portion of that budget, and I know there are a lot of other items on that list. Has there been any discussion around how this chunk coming out of there may or may not affect other items in that list getting done?
So as of right now, the things that we have currently in progress are the Reinhardt pergolas. We've got parking lot work that's taking place. We've got some dedicated funds for a matching grant at Baker for the parking lot. And we also have the skate park renovation coming up. So looking at, I mean, we don't know exact numbers on the things that we haven't bid out yet, but looking at all of it together, we always had this large court resurfacing project in mind. And I'm also, it will be going through the budget process, but I'm looking to allocate more funding, lodging tax and parks SDCs to this project that gives us some flexibility in those things on our deferred maintenance list.
And Brian, I will say that when when the Parks Committee looked at our priorities, a lot of the top priorities are our courts right now. So looking at our priority ones, this would take care of many of those priority one issues.
Great, thank you.
Joel, then Rick.
I just had a quick question, Wendy. First off, I appreciate both you and Susan and the work that you do, and I know that there's a lot of work to be done, so it's amazing. So both option A and B satisfy equally the total demand in the city for both tennis courts and pickleball courts. There's no difference between alternatives, except that there's probably one less pickleball court and one more tennis court between the alternatives. Is that correct?
Yes, it would be 9 pickleball courts. The original plan asked for 8 to 10 at Reinhardt, so we're meeting right in the middle there. And,
So in terms of the demand across the city, there's always going to be tennis courts available and pickleball courts available to the same capacity between those two alternatives for the most part. So then I just would like you to confirm if this is correct. Then the only difference is that the tennis court use that's presently ongoing under one of the options could no longer go to All Sports Park. They'd go to West Home Park or another park where there's an available tennis court. And so either option then would work and is very doable. You just have some change in use patterns. And the All Sports Park would be All Sports Park minus tennis.
I will say that I think the original pickleball plan that was presented to us had some errors in their measurement. Because I think they thought they were getting some tournament-sized courts on top of the tennis courts.
Okay.
But I think when I double-checked the measurement, it wasn't right, which is kind of what started then looking at this in a different way when Wendy then brought up the basketball courts. Because if you just overlay on the tennis courts, you'll either end up with, well, if you want tournament-sized, you're only going to get like 4 courts on there, not the 8 or
Right.
the 10 that they thought they were, were able to do. So I think actually it's saving a pickleball court is actually increasing the options for pickleball with the new plan over the old plan.
Okay, so either option is really viable, and the MOU would go with moving the tennis courts, no tennis courts at All Sports Park. So either one is very doable.
Rick, then Valerie.
So Wendy, I may be looking at an old aerial photograph. I see the new soccer field, but I'm not seeing the tennis courts or the basketball courts out there. It shows a whole bunch of baseball diamonds. Where are the tennis courts out there now in basketball?
The tennis courts are closest to the water treatment plant, so that Spruce and Webster, where they intersect. So it would be the very easterly side of Reinhardt Park.
Okay, I think I see them. Yes, I see them there. Thank you.
Valerie?
Yeah, I'm going to go and say that I'm in favor of option A. I think that it's a good compromise. I think that would best fit everybody. I do believe that we need a tennis court at the All Sports Park. I think that's perfectly understandable. And I think that having 3 tournament, I know one of the goals, and this goes along with the tourism, is that, bringing tournaments into town is something that, we're all in support of. So I think keeping open-minded to be able to do that is important. So I'm just in favor of option A and moving forward.
Brian?
I would agree with Valerie. I think option A sounds good.
Thank you. Kurt?
So when my daughter was going to Hidden Valley, she played tennis, and they had a lot of their tennis tournaments there at the All Sports Park. Where are they going to play now?
So Eckstein Park would remain dedicated to tennis, and Gilbert Creek Park has multiple courts. Our recreation contractor does not have any record of Hidden Valley actually, and I know what you're talking about because I've seen kids out there that are obviously on a team and not just general recreational use. They have not paid or reserved those courts for their use. So that's the
All right, but
dilemma.
we haven't got any input from any of the school tennis teams on this.
What our input came from the local tennis clubs, and so I don't know if they are in touch with the school teams or not. I know that the Grants Pass High School uses their own and Gilbert Creek. And then, then we would have the other multiple court tennis areas in town too. Morrison would go back to just tennis, Gilbert and Eckstein, right? For multiple court areas.
Joel?
So Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Parks Department or the committee was divided on this, but you as chairman, based on your relationships in working out the MOU, favored option A. Okay, so I would, either way will work. The Parks Committee was split, even, and I think that with all due respect to the staff, Susan's worked with the MOU, with the pickleball players and the tennis court folks. There's some folks that probably weren't represented there, but to preserve that relationship and the previous work with that MOU, I would support Susan with alternative A, and either alternative will work.
All right, we've heard several people in support of option A. Does anyone want to advocate for option B? Nope, I think we're leaning towards option
I'm sorry, I misspoke. Susan, I misspoke. It was option B, correct?
A.
A, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, A, I'm sorry. Okay, A.
Aaron?
I had just a clarifying question. So on the layout of the courts, you mentioned no fencing. So is there no fencing between those 6 courts over there? Or is there a fence at least on, is splitting the top 3 and the bottom 3? Okay, thank you. Yep, okay, there, so that is a fence, all right.
And the idea was to maximize space, so minimize fencing, which has pluses and minuses. But we felt that would be a safety issue if balls are coming from behind the players, and so there would be fencing between the 2 rows of courts. And Wendy had talked about the option of future courts at the horseshoe pits. I kind of doubt that that will really be necessary for a long time. You know, this would be such an expansion to the current pickleball facilities. It's a great future option, but right now I don't see that that would really come into play for a long time, probably. And Councillor Collins, I do want to address, I would hope all the high schools could share the, like, Gilbert Creek, you know, or someplace, because I do think it's important that our high school teams have tennis places, but I would hope that they could schedule that one appropriately.
Okay, so the council's preference is towards option A. Do we need to instruct you to proceed with pricing, or what do we need from the council at this point?
So if we have general direction that you want option A, all we'll do is we'll move forward with that. Ultimately, the contract is going to be much more than $50,000, so we'll bring it to you, and we can have it either as a consent item or a council action item.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. And thank you, Susan, for being here and waiting so long and the extra work you put in on this issue. It's been kicking around longer than I've been mayor, I know, so it's been a while.
I just want to clarify very quickly, are we able to move forward with getting the proper co-op pricing then? Is that, okay, great, perfect. Thank you.
All right, landscape and xeriscape development code update. Next on the table, looks like Brad is coming back up to talk with us about that.
All right. Try to walk you through these changes here. You have seen these, it's been a while, but I'm going to represent Donna Rupp, one of our associate planners who presented to you last time, as well as Tony Meekum, our urban forester who's here today, both of whom were on the subcommittee that did some work on this. But if you have more technical questions, we have them available. So the purpose here is to update you on some proposed changes to some landscaping sections in our development code. And it relates to your goals by facilitating sustainable and manageable growth. So just a little background, particularly for the new council members and the mayor. Back in fall of 2019, council did direct staff to create a committee to explore some changes. This whole thing really relates to 2 main areas. It's the landscaping of our commercial parking lots in town and the landscaping that is required in the residential. So it's, you know, it's more or less impacts at one level or another, both residential and commercial. There was a committee back in 2016, and I believe that Councilor Lovelace was on that committee, or at least a liaison, the Urban Tree Advisory Committee, who made some recommendations at that time. And it had kind of languished. Most of those were really oriented to commercial parking, but then in 2019, there was additional direction to look at particularly the ground cover requirements for landscaping. So right now, if you build a new residential home in the city of Grants Pass, there's a minimum amount of ground cover, living ground cover, that you have to put on your front lawns. And so the direction was, you know, can we maybe come up with some water saving ideas and give some alternatives to that requirement? So this committee, six committee members, they're listed there, began meeting, and they talked about those sort of 2 main areas, the 2016 Urban Tree Advisory Committee recommendations, as well as the new direction from council to look at residential. So they held 4 meetings in February, March, June 5th, and June 19th of 2020. Sorry, I didn't put the year on there. And then in October 2020, council supported at a general level moving forward with some kind of amendment to the landscaping code. Councilor Fazer at that time requested some additional information on the tree lists. And then in November, Tony came here and gave a more detailed presentation about the tree list and some changes that we were looking at. So here's just some of the highlights in your packets. You have the full amendment. These are just going to kind of highlight a few of those. We're really talking about 2 sections, and for some odd reason I put Article 25 first instead of 23, but the ones in 25, there's 3 or 4 of them here. The first one talks about replacing dead or damaged parking lot trees, and we have several examples around town of parking lots. The Tree Advisory Committee a couple of years ago actually did kind of an inventory around town to identify where those are, and they came up with a number of them. So this is a change going to a 2-inch caliper tree if you're going to replace. That's a little bit larger than what we require in the code if you're doing a new tree, but because they're replacement trees, trying to kind of get to that canopy coverage a little quicker, we wanted to do that. It does also recommend a change to the compact parking space. Right now, you can go up to a maximum of 25% of your parking lot in compact spaces. This would increase that to 35%. Just to be clear, we do not see this used very much in our to date. In our site planning, we see a few compact parking spaces, but typically nowhere near 25%. So this doesn't mandate that number of compact parking spaces, it just would allow somebody to do it. It also requires separation between parking lot lighting poles and parking lot trees. A couple other changes to Article 25. It would move the way that we calculate the canopy. So right now, it's a quantity, basically a certain minimum number of trees. The recommendation is to go to a percentage of the tree canopy. So that would, that's going to be varying. Each parking lot's going to be looked at differently, but the goal would be to get to a 50% coverage of any particular parking lot. It would also reduce the maximum number of parking spaces allowed between the trees. Right now, you can have 11 parking spaces between landscaped islands. That would just shrink that a little bit. Again, with the end objective here being to get to 50% shading canopy coverage. And it would also incorporate requirements to decrease tree mortality. There's actually a number of those that the tree committee looked at. A lot of this has to do with like your soil structure, the width in the planters, other things that really kind of help to improve tree survivability, especially in an urban island kind of effect. So I didn't detail all those out here, but those are listed in your packet. They did quite a bit of work on what some of those changes would be. And then the last one to Article 25, this distinguishes ground cover rules between the landscaping that's on the perimeter of a parking lot and the landscaping that is actually just in the islands. So if you're in some of these commercial parking lot at Winco or anywhere else, you can, there's the kind of the perimeter, but then you have the islands that are inside the parking lot. Right now, it actually requires that even the islands have kind of this ground cover, and I think we've all been to those where you just, I think I'm just going to walk across the island, and you just kind of have these pathways that get over these, these little shrubs and stuff. They don't work very well. They're required at the front end, and they tend to just kind of erode and degrade. So this would actually change that and not require the 100% living ground cover in those, and would allow mulch only. So getting more to the residential side of things, and
Sarah.
particularly the WaterWise and xeriscape options. The subcommittee did recommend offering a menu of choices for this instead of the current code, which just requires and mandates the ground cover.
Did you have a question, Brian?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just wondering if we might be able to ask questions about the commercial now while it's fresh before we get into all the residential, because this is kind of
Sure.
heady stuff.
Brad says yes.
Okay. So I had a question about the increases max compact space parking allowance from 25 to 35%. That applies just to commercially zoned properties. That doesn't apply necessarily to like city-owned lots or city street parking?
That's correct.
Okay. And then what is the current requirement for the caliper of new trees that are planted?
I'm going to look at Tony to see, I think it might be 1.5. It's 1.25 or 1.5. Do you know, Tony?
Yeah, I believe that it is in the replacement. Each resident or each zone kind of has its own requirement. In the commercial in the parking lot, this was to make it consistent, because in one section of the development code it requires 2 inches, and then in another within the parking lots it's less. I believe it is around 1.5 inches or 1 3/4 inches. So this was also to make it consistent.
Okay. And then regarding section 25.035, which I think is the next, I don't know that I saw that in the adjoining text here in the amendment. I don't know that I saw those specific recommendations in here. Did anyone else see that?
It's on page 4, 25.035 subsection 3. So that's landscape standards, 50% of a paved parking lot surface will be shaded by a tree canopy.
Oh, I see. On here it says 23.035, so I think it was just a typo.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay, I'm good now. Thanks.
Any other questions, Rick, and then Joel?
So Brad, I just need further definition. When you say 25 requires, on that same issue of the 50%, it said it requires 50% of the paved parking lot surface be shaded by tree maturity. Okay, I planted a tree 40 years ago in my backyard, and it was 1-inch caliper, and now at breast height, it's probably 4 feet in diameter, and the spread is 60 feet tall and 60 feet wide. Of course, you can't put a tree like that in a parking lot, and yet if we're looking at achieving 50% shade, I'm questioning whether that's too extreme, although I know you can go in Hawaii and get some of these trees, they don't grow vertically, they grow horizontally, but how can you, in a commercial parking lot, achieve that coverage? I think it seems very wishful and would take 40 years to get there. Tony, do you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. In our current code, there are trees that have that size of canopy at maturity that are designated and noted as parking lot suitable. However, the issue we're facing is the available soil volume for those trees. So we quite often don't see that happen in our parking lots. So that was one of the recommendations from back in 2016, was to incorporate structural soils and allowing the trees to have more volume to grow to those sizes.
And would it be appropriate to have what you call the permeable surface parking lot so that the trees would have the water?
That's a big change. Would it help? I can't imagine that it wouldn't help. But, and actually the materials are getting better. You know, 15, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have wanted them to put the permeable material down because it just wasn't of a quality that would really last. But I mean, I've seen several products now where, you know, it does allow that permeable area, but you know, it is more expensive up front. But for the tree itself, I can't imagine how that additional percolation down to the root system just wouldn't help. I mean,
Okay, thank you.
and to be clear, when we're talking about the canopy, just to your point, Councillor, I mean, you are looking at the end maturity. You know, it's not, that 50% isn't at the front when you know, when you're planting I mean, when you're building the parking lot, you're looking at the tree schedule and what is that particular species going to be at maturity in terms of its coverage, so.
Joel and then Valerie?
Well, I'm having too much fun. First off, I'd like to recognize the interdisciplinary approach, and I'd like to recognize Councilor Frazier in his participation. And so you had several different disciplines working on this, and you came up with a very professional product, in my opinion, Brad. And I appreciate that approach to it, and that process works well. And I just had one observation. 50% canopy closure at maturity, which is probably what, 40, 50 years from now, is foraging spotted owl habitat. That's lost on everybody.
We're speechless. Thank you, Joel. Valerie?
I guess my question is, and like I said, I was on 2016, so I know this is a long time coming, and I do appreciate, we've all looked at those poor trees out in the Grants Pass Shopping Center for years and felt sorry for them. So I think this is a great thing, but I wonder who monitors this? I mean, I just wonder who goes out and checks the boxes to make sure that the trees are living, and, you know, that's my question.
Is your question specific to monitoring after the fact, or at the?
Yes, who does do that sort of thing? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, as with most of our code enforcement, it's complaint driven. So, you know, if we were to receive a complaint at community development, we would investigate that just like we would any other code enforcement, to be honest. I mean, that's kind of how the development code is structured. So we certainly don't have staff who are driving around parking lots, you know, every week with their caliper inch measure and saying you're out of compliance. But there are this does get largely enforced at the front end, you know, at the time of planting, and then as the years go by, there is a mechanism for us to go back to a property owner and you know, say that the code does actually require maintenance and on ongoing maintenance of your property. That is in the code.
All right, I think we can continue on with the residential. Oh, DJ? Is it a question about
yes,
commercial?
Couple questions.
Thank you.
So the addition of the parking lot lighting, that is an addition, parking lot lighting, not in a place where a tree is supposed to be in 20 feet from where a tree is supposed to be, is that an addition?
It is a change to what's currently.
Can you explain that, please? Why that was changed in that way? It kind of seems to take away from maybe expectations of lighting or otherwise.
Sure. Yeah. Tony was on the committee. I don't know if that got much discussion at that point. Are you able to shed any light on that?
We didn't get an opportunity to talk about that too much in the latest subcommittee, but it would be consistent with like street trees that we need them to be that distance away from the lights so that they're not in conflict with each other.
Sure. Whereas it'd be nice to have an illustration, I suppose, about the lighting and how it could be achieved, and then building on that, going back to the 50% requirement. It doesn't seem like a developer would be able to readily imagine or expect what kind of parking lot they would be able to build, as opposed to the old where 1 tree and 16 square feet of landscaping per 10 parking spaces. I mean, you're able to imagine that or draw that out readily, rather than having that 50%. It would seem that that's going to add quite a bit more work involved to parking spaces, because I understand you almost start your design in the parking space per what you can have as far as your commercial structure goes, because however many occupants or square footage otherwise, that's how many parking spaces you need. So you almost develop backwards in a way. And I wanted to comment that seems to make it more difficult, and it seems to be quite lofty to expect 50% of a parking area to be covered by trees. So I really think some standard illustrations to kind of demonstrate what that would look like, as well as the lighting, would really help. Do you know what I mean? So
Sure.
you could imagine that, you could design that readily, because that's a fairly substantial change to the code. And then I also wanted to bring up inspection recommendations. I understand there was some inspection recommendations last time that Donna came. Just using the example, there was a recommendation of inspection to have an active system running for final inspection, so they could make sure the system was running adequately watered, and that no water would touch a hard surface area adjacent to a landscaping strip. Can you elaborate on the landscaping or on the inspection requirements that are going to be recommended for change for commercial?
We talked about it just a little bit. It's coming down to kind of a weird technicality with how we currently do the inspections, which right now all the landscaping inspections are only at the very end of the process, as compared to having, like in many of the building ones, you have intermittent inspections because of the structure. Just requires those intermittent inspections, whereas landscaping only requires the end. I can bring back to you a little bit more detail on that. I know that that's where they kind of got hung up, was on sort of this technicality and the software in terms of how you request inspections.
Sure. Well, I think, okay, let me just back this up. Are you recommending any changes in inspections for commercial or residential, otherwise, in regards to landscaping with this code amendment?
The committee brought it up as an issue. I don't think that at this point, from an administration standpoint, just to change it, we're really there yet. I think we would come back to you if we were going to make some changes there.
Okay, so for example, the 23061 inspection requirement for completion and occupancy, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are those changes, or is that?
I'm sorry, what page is that?
23061 on page 8, inspection required under completion and occupancy. Inspection prior to planting, verifying the grade, installation of irrigation, soil preparation, plant materials, all tagged, inspected. And then further inspection of irrigation system, and with water being turned on to demonstrate functionality of the system. Is that a new requirement, or is that?
It's not, that's current code.
So
yeah.
So if it's current code, I don't imagine that has been exercised heretofore.
Right.
So, because that seems entirely burdensome to have that length of inspection requirements for occupancy. So that's kind of where I want to go into. I think inspections required is a kind of an important place to go in this discussion, if you will.
Sure.
Joel?
So DJ, canopy closure is estimated depending on the species you plant. And so for example, I'll just throw out some figures that aren't accurate, but white oak has a canopy closure with a 50-foot radius. And so you'd calculate the square feet associated with that. One of your narrow canopy trees, let's say one of the populous species, that, the tall, narrow hardwood, that would maybe have 10-foot diameter. And so each of the trees has a different mature canopy. And so you just take your entire parking lot square footage, and depending on the tree you plant, you don't have to plant as many white oak as you do the popular. And you can choose your different trees that equal 50% at maturity. And those figures, I would guess, I haven't asked Tony this, but those figures would be available in a table so that the contractor would know how many trees he would have to plant, of what species to achieve that. And it would be a fairly simple thing. So if you had you're doing the calculations there, if you had pi r squared of a 40-foot radius tree, that is 16, see pi r squared, that would be 40 times 40, that's 1600, times 3 is 4800. So one of those trees would be 4,800 feet, or a 0.1% canopy. So you'd only need 5 of those per acre.
Other questions? All right, we can move on to residential, please.
Okay. So in terms of the recommended changes here on the residential, we, instead of going with the current single approach, this is recommending that we go with a menu that would give landscape architects, designers, whoever's preparing the landscape plan, choices. And there's the Firewise option, which would be recommended. The way that this is worded now, these aren't mandated. You can still do, and there may be some advantages actually to having a sod that has a more moist, kind of typical year-round soil contact. But in this case, recommended in the wildland-urban interface and for sloped areas would be the Firewise. Xeriscaping, which is your low water use established, would be another option. The native plant / pollinator / wildlife would be focused on sort of species and habitat, and also has typically less water when you go with those type of plants. And then on-site water retention, we would not anticipate that being used much, but it does, if you have excess surface water, it would allow you to have, a design where maybe you're using, like disconnecting from your gutter downspouts and, kind of a rain garden approach. So it's just giving that flexibility. The current tree list is here. That's in Article 23. And for the residential side, and this is getting to Councilor King's point, we actually already require the calculation of a canopy, and we do use the growth or the maximum spread of those trees. So it's not, the change is going really into the commercial parking lots, because we already require this in the residential side. The updated tree list, and this is just going back to what Tony presented to council several months ago, does increase the number of species options. It increased the I don't even know how to say that word. Is it genera? And there's several other improvements to it. As you can see on the middle column, the current tree list has just the kind of the power line information, drought and parking lot, and the new tree list would add a whole nother set of standards for people to utilize. So that's kind of the highlights of what we're looking at. Again, this is being brought to you to see if council supports moving forward with some kind of code amendment. It would still require a public hearing at the Planning Commission. They would hold their public hearing and then make a recommendation to you. But before we proceeded with going to that to the Planning Commission, we wanted to see where council was at with these changes.
Questions? DJ?
So the different recommendations, I guess the first question would be, could somebody utilize multiple different proposed design options for a residential property?
As it's
theoretically,
yes.
They have a massive front yard and they have a xeriscape over here and
sure.
Maybe rain conservation over here. Okay, so as that type A, that first recommendation, it's pretty well spelled out. I've been operating under this code for frustrating many years, and it's pretty well spelled out. are you intending on spelling out sort of a standards of procedure and implementation for the other 4 recommendations, fire-wise, low water, native plant, and on-site water retention? List of plants, for example, you know, what kind of rocks are approved. I mean, I've seen a lot of development codes get pretty stickler on what kind of rocks you can put in your front yard, for example. So can we expect sort of a little laundry list or direction associated with those paths?
Yeah, absolutely. We would need to give some specific standards for each of those if you're going to utilize, so that it's clear before you even apply what is expected.
Clear and objective standards, right?
That's right.
That's right. Okay. Illustrations, again, like it's mentioned with parking lot examples, the light examples for commercials. I think that's also going to be really handy for a developer or just a homeowner that wants to change their front yard to be able to see an illustration or an example otherwise, which I know that was talked about in that subcommittee. But I think that would be great to have a sort of tagged illustrations with these recommendations.
Rick?
Brad, a couple of years ago, we were on vacation and we stopped at the island of Catalina off of California. And instead of using mulch, and even in the public areas, they were using artificial grass. And recently we had a neighbor down on 12th Street that put in his whole front yard in artificial grass. And the new artificial grasses is really hard to tell because they aren't so uniform. They have more of the traditional grass look to them. But I'm not seeing in here where that, I want to say, is encouraged or allowed. Is it allowed instead of mulching or?
Currently, no. And it's not reflected in this draft either. Yeah, if that's something the council wanted, we would have to probably come back with a different workshop on that topic.
I know it's much more expensive to do artificial grass than mulch, but I guess I would like to see if the owner or the house or the commercial place wanted to do artificial grass, that they could have that as an option. Thank you.
Any other questions, Brian?
Yeah, I think these new options look great, especially the ones that will help with our water demand in the city, which I think the first 3 of those new options do help to address that. And so my question is do we have any way or any sort of mechanism that we could use to possibly incentivize people to use those, whether it's reducing the cost on permit or some other method, so that we can maybe encourage that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, with a non-mandatory approach like this, in order to try to help move us towards what we want, the incentives is the way to do it. I don't believe that the committee explored any incentives but you know, those do exist in other codes, and reduction on parking spaces and other things. But there, you know, it can get, you know, you start to have, you really have to look at the unintended consequences on those. So I think that analysis, if you wanted to, we would have to do more of that.
Yeah, I think it's more, what I was thinking is with regards to residential, because I agree, if you start getting in, some of the commercial stuff can get complicated. But if it's relatively easy to, you know, do a little bit of research on options we might be able to implement to encourage homeowners to do this, I think that would be wise.
Rob?
So when you talk about unintended consequences, I can remember, I think it was 2009, I think it was the last time I was on the council, when we looked at something like this, the Public Works Director was saying that an unintended consequence is if the water usage went down, that our rates would have to go up. Like that wouldn't balance out from the city's perspective. So I'm just wondering if you or Jason has any any thoughts on that, because I very clearly remember it sounded really counterintuitive at first, and then I guess I accepted it, but it just, when you talk about unintended consequences, if our demand went down, would our rates have to go up?
I'm not going to say yes, it definitely could be a potential. If people all of a sudden used half the same quantity of water, we still have the same amount of capital work to do. Our costs are still running pretty high. Would our current rate structure give us enough revenue to continue operating? I couldn't answer all of those questions, but it is a distinct possibility. I know when you looked at the power companies, a lot of them really strongly encouraged conservation, 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 and then right on the heels of that had to implement rate increases because they did get that conservation and then they didn't have the operating capital that they needed to keep updating their infrastructure. So we would want to balance that. I suspect we're in a pretty good place. I don't think that many people are going to take advantage of these programs, and if it is, it's over the much longer period. So I don't think initially it would be an issue.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that I hopefully the rate part of it can be worked out, but I very much support the water conservation if it works out for everything. And an idea that I had a while ago is that the city even have a dozen different options on their website for homeowners, with a materials list and so forth, so homeowners could convert themselves to lower water usage, assuming that wouldn't drive the rates through the roof. But for developers to have more on the menu is I think really a no-brainer. Yeah.
Any other questions? Vanessa?
I understand the residential landscaping menu is a recommendation, the 4 points. Has there been any consideration to requiring a fire-wise landscape in our wildfire hazard zones designated by the fire marshal?
Not to my knowledge. And I don't know if from the chief's standpoint on some of the group that's been doing the work on the WUI, structural code that you saw an update on recently, this has, in terms of getting that defensible space and things like that. I don't believe that any work's been done in terms of, a mandatory approach on that. I can tell you in Idaho and where I used to work in some other communities in Arizona, it has been the case, but I just don't think that's been looked at here.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, in terms of what we want to do going forward with this, TJ has suggested some illustrations, talked about encouraging artificial options and some sort of incentive. Do you want to have staff move forward with any of those ideas, bring it back? What do you think? Joel?
Well, one of the things that strikes me, there was 2 additional topics that are actually go beyond this. I mean, we could approve this if there's support today, but then there's the one about incentives and the other one about in the high fire risk areas. There would be an additional topic to be determined in the future. Do you want to provide incentives? Do you want to require it in high risk areas? And we go ahead with what we got here. That would be my recommendation, unless you wanted to slow it down and include those other 2 things in.
Rob?
Well, I would definitely want to know that if let's say, lawn watering was reduced by 25%, what would that necessarily do to our bills? Because for sure, I remember that the Public Works Director several years ago was very clear that it could really raise our rates. So I'd want to know that going in.
TJ?
So yeah, certainly that expanding on those 4 propositions, and I have to say that I was expecting an expansion on those. I was expecting this code recommendation to be quite a bit more developed, given the time lapse between the last time that we talked about and the former direction that was given from council seemed to be pretty crystal clear about wanting to move in that direction, especially in the residential area, and now we are, I feel that we're in this exact same spot that we were 8-9 months ago when we talked about this. So I'm marginally disappointed by that. In response to the water usage, just as personal experience as a developer and a guy with neighbors that don't have lawn, a lot of people don't want lawn. It's falling quickly out of popularity. I have a couple lawns and I love them to death, and I spend way too much time on them, and I put a lot of water on them. But I would have to say 30-40% of my clients do not want a lawn. And by current residential standards, it's pretty much directing them that they have to have a lawn and that they have to use that water. Aside from clever ways that we've been able to get around to it, but now is the time to stop having to do those clever ways to get around and give people what they want.
Brian.
I just have a question about, can we get additional information back on those things and concurrently send it to UAPC so UAPC can, so we can start moving it through that process, and then we can also get, you know, maybe this other stuff at the same time?
Rick, do you have an answer to that?
Oh.
No? Do you have an answer to that, Aaron?
At the moment, need to research that a little more.
Okay. Rick and then Valerie.
So Rob, over the past 40 years on A Street, there are some absolutely gorgeous lawns in those areas. And over time, with new owners of the property, either for two choices: one, the cost of water, or else they were not into lawn mowing. They basically let those lawns dry up. And I think we may have already seen that 25% loss. And to me, beautification is more important than maintaining the water rates. I question, I'm using more water, maybe I'm making up the difference for those people like DJ, you know, because I do want a nice lawn. But I think we may already be there as in the reduction just because of where the price of things are. And as we look at the new ordinance, I guess I would like to see more options of creating a beautiful appearance, even if it doesn't use water. Thank you.
Valerie?
Yeah, I think that the watching our water prices go up has been an incentive in itself. And so I think it's time that we, in our code, acknowledge that yes, we do give you other options so that you have different choices. And so I think that's important. I think the key is choice. I, as Rick does, have a lawn. I personally think having a lawn keeps my house cooler, and it also does give me some fire safety. So that is kind of a choice that somebody might want to have, but it's a choice, and I understand somebody else's choice to have the other. So I'm just in charge of, I'm just in favor of sending this on to the UAPC because I think that needs to get it going. And I think the natural incentive is, as our water bill climbs, more and more people are choosing not to water their lawns, as Rick said. So, I think that's pretty much a moot point, but I think we can come back and visit that at a later time and let this move through the UAPC.
Vanessa?
I'd like to see, in addition to the residential landscaping menu, I'd like to see a fifth option or a fifth requirement for fire-wise to be mandated in the wildfire hazard zones. The whole city of Grants Pass can be considered the wildland urban interface, so I am glad to see that that's an option for the areas that are not designated as the wildfire hazard zones, but I think that that would work in cooperation with what the council has recently moved forward for development requirements in those areas.
Other comments? All right, it feels like we have some changes to make maybe before we give it the official forward to UAPC, but. All right.
Sarah, do we want to see if we can do those concurrently? Because I know we're doing that maybe with adult use in a similar way, just to kind of expedite this whole thing.
Do you have a comment, Aaron?
So the question, run your question by again, just so I can make sure it's clear.
Well, there's some additional information it sounds like council wants, and I'm wondering if we can give it to UAPC while we're getting those additional details, just to kind of shorten the timeline a little bit, so we can just get through it faster.
So, well, you can get additional details, I guess, but we would need to have something for UAPC to be considering. If you need some additional information on something, that's okay, but to start it with the UAPC and publicizing it as a public hearing and going through that process, and then adding on something after that you can't do that. But if you have it all packaged up, this is the package we want to send to UAPC, and those 5 items that are in the package, on 2 of the 5 we want some additional information just to have, that would be okay. But if you're like, we have these 3 items, we have 2 potentially, but let's just start with these and we'll just throw those in there halfway through, or midterm, you can't do that. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Okay, I'm a little confused because the way we are utilizing UAPC for adult use is we were essentially like, let's just give it to them because we have to, and then we'll make a decision later. So that's probably not how UAPC should traditionally be utilized. So I think I have a better understanding now.
I think the idea is for them to not have to do a whole bunch of work on this, but just review it and give their findings, and not coming up with alternatives. DJ?
Sure. So I have a question. Is this the kind of land use decision that it is mandated that UAPC looks into it? So it's a 4, okay. So just wanted to make a comment that there's now 3 recent examples of this being a little awkward with in regards to UAPC. The conditional use permitting discussion, adult use ordinance, and now a landscape text amendment where the city council is the applicant to the UAPC in an ordinance that we would like to change. And it gets a little awkward in that, do we just shotgun it to them and ask them what they would like us to do, being the applicant? Or do we work over what we would like to see done and then send it to them? Particularly the adult use ordinance is a very popular poster child example. We did make recommendations to them and they said no and no, and now they want to rework a policy to the applicant of the ordinance change. So these are awkward circumstances that we're putting ourselves into because of this mandatory UAPC hearing. So just wanted to bring attention to that.
And to add to that, to hopefully clarify also, it sparked the like the adult use thing. If you sent this to the UAPC, that's fine, but the thing you shouldn't be doing, if you still want to get some additional information, is doing any kind of deliberation of substance with the subject that you sent to the UAPC. So once it goes to UAPC has got to go through its process. So if you're prepared to send something to UAPC, you're not discussing any substance of what you're sent to UAPC, you're fine. If you want to just send something to UAPC and you still want to deliberate on a couple things, then that would be inappropriate.
And it just feels to me like we have enough things on this that we just need to wait, and there's no rush to get it to UAPC. So we'll just continue on with our process before we get them going on that process.
I'm just clarifying. So basically you're asking them to bring back more information for another workshop?
Yes,
Is that what
staff to bring back information to us.
And specifically that, I just want clarity on what information that you're asking staff to come back with. So for my clarity too. I'm just curious.
Do you want me to go through a list? I mean, I wrote down some things, but I wasn't being exhaustive here. I think that's really kind of on them. But, I mean, DJ had wanted some illustrations. We talked about possible lawn requirements or changing up lawn requirements. We talked about...
You mean in terms of fake lawn or whatever that's called, artificial? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed like you guys had enough changes that you weren't really satisfied with this document, that they need to bring you a document that you're more satisfied with before we move it on to UAPC. But I will put it on staff to review the tape and make a list of your concerns.
Yeah, that's, we have those down and more, so we'll definitely bring back modified and with a special focus on the 4 new areas and having much more detail on what those specific requirements are. And then, yeah, we'll have an amended code before you.
I do think, though, at this point, there was a lot of discussion about a lot of stuff, and I do appreciate Councilor Levis's question on what we're actually going to be bringing back, because I don't want to miss an expectation of a council member. So I would like to have some further discussion, Mayor, if you feel comfortable, of exactly identifying what you're wanting staff to bring back with.
Okay, well, lay it out, guys. What would you like staff to come back with? Rick?
I'd like to seek consideration for artificial lawns, but also in commercial locations and in the landscape strips and where they might be putting down mulch, that they also have the option of putting artificial grass.
Is that, are we gonna, I mean, are we gonna?
I guess I'm just gonna go through each counselor if they have something that they want you to bring back. Isn't that what you just asked for?
Yeah, I just didn't know if you're gonna get consensus on those items for that, or if it's just gonna be a council member bringing up an item.
Are there counselors in support of those ideas? Raise your hand if you are. I see at least, okay, a whole bunch of them. Okay, DJ, did you have something?
Sure, I think you mentioned the things, Brad, that I had brought up. One thing I didn't hear said back to me, but I'm sure you have on your list, was the inspection requirements. I'm pretty sure, just based on my limited knowledge of these things, that those haven't quite been adhered to. They feel a little burdensome for me, so look into how the inspections have been structured in the past and likened a little bit more to, so people can just read this code and follow along with it. Because I guess the spirit of that was have a list of trees, have them all tagged, somebody comes out and looks at all your trees. I kind of liken that to having to have a building inspector come out and look at all the lumber I'm going to build the house with before I build it. That just seems kind of, I don't know, double-checked expectations that don't really seem appropriate. If you put it in there and it's not what you said it was in the plan, well, you can't be approved. But seeing the lumber pile on the ground before I build a house out of it seems a little too much. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks.
I don't know how to quickly summarize that in order to ask the council if they support your idea. Do you guys support DJ's idea?
Yeah, I do. I just want to say, if they were to put the type of tree and know what do the math ahead of time, it seems like that can be approved ahead of time without having them to come out to the site, but that comes down to the same thing.
So on Council Faser's suggestion, I've got it down as inspection requirements and process. Some more information on that.
Okay. Council, would you support that? I'm seeing you got at least 3 there, DJ. Any other ideas you want staff to come back at? Vanessa?
I'd like an additional requirement, not a recommendation, that wildfire hazard zones within the city are required to install Firewise landscaping.
All right, Firewise landscaping for wildfire areas. I'm seeing enough hands for at least. Okay, other ideas? Brian?
Yeah, I just had a question about possible mechanisms for providing discount or incentive for low water use options that are chosen.
Okay, do we have support for investigating incentives for low water use options? I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, yep, at least 4. Anything else? All right, thank you. Agenda review. Our next council meeting is Wednesday night. You guys all have budget committee tomorrow night. Wednesday night, we have a public hearing to consider an ordinance on a property line vacation, not written on here what the property line is, but an ordinance, G Street, is that what you're saying? Okay. A common property line between tax lots on G Street. Okay, council action to consider an ordinance having to deal with the wildfire hazard mitigation construction guide, a resolution to consider replacing the water treatment plant site cleanup, resolution on system development charge grant for steam distillery, another SDC grant for Stepping Stone Preschool, another for rogue cleaners, a business retention and relocation assistance grant for road cleaners, consideration of a Beacon Drive water line resolution, and motion to amend the development code for the certified local government findings of fact, a motion to dealing with a comprehensive plan zone amendment for Grants Pass Downs finding of fact, an appointment to the Bikeways Committee, and consideration of removing a member from COPA. And that was due to low attendance. Do we have any questions about that? Rob and then Valerie.
So I wanted to give staff a heads up because I did have some questions I was going to bring up Wednesday night about the SDC grants. There was 2 businesses there that to me would quite likely trigger a violation of our adult use ordinance. We've got I guess a preschool that wants to go in near a bar out on Dowell Road, and that's I'm not exactly sure how many feet it is, but it's pretty close to that bar. And then we've got the one on G Street, the distillery, the steam distillery, that is called in their application a new business with a separate address from Climate City. It kind of sounds to me like an adult business, and yet it would be right across the street from Depot Park and probably less than 1,000 feet from the football academy. So I was going to bring that up Wednesday night, but because I couldn't, knowing what I know now, I couldn't vote for those SDC grants because it just doesn't seem like everything is kind of being properly applied in those instances. So I really would like clarification on how they're essentially getting around the adult use ordinance is the way I kind of perceive it now. I could be wrong though.
All right, I think we can clarify that Wednesday, but I believe that the distillery is not seeking to be closed to minors. So it's not an adult use because it's would be family friendly.
I guess just to be clear then, the fact that they seem to be very small, 850 square feet, it's going to be a tasting area and things like that. I just don't know how close minors are allowed to that sort of thing. So to me, that kind of makes it an adult use, but I, again, would like to hear what because it's 850 square feet, I don't see how that would really work.
All right, other questions for Wednesday, Valerie?
Yeah, I've noticed that the DMO, the contract, and the startup costs have been removed from any of the meetings, and I just thought it might be a good thing to at least get the startup costs put on the contract, which we all agreed at the $50,000, just so that the startup board could move forward with hiring the moving forward for hiring an executive director. So I think that's a timely thing that I would like to see put on as possible.
I think we had previously agreed not to do the contract and those startup costs separately.
I guess I'm asking for a difference in that at this point. So I guess I'm asking, since we agreed what the startup costs could be and which amount was going to be allowed for that, it just seems like I understand the contract's not worked out, but that part is. And they will have the board put together in this following week, and they're stuck. They can't go out to do anything until they have the money associated with hiring a executive director.
I think based on the progress we made today, I would feel comfortable with putting the whole thing on the May 19th workshop, or excuse me, the May 19th meeting. I think we've made a big step on a step of progress on the contract today. Does that satisfy everybody? All right, anything else? That was just one, so you want to talk about Monday too? Next Monday's workshop is our housing summit. It's all about housing next Monday, so we have our Housing Advisory Committee coming to us with their list of recommendations for priority actions, as well as kind of a deep dive into the auxiliary dwelling units and maximum/minimum density changes. Any questions about any of that? All right, and then going forward, any new things that anybody wants to add? DJ?
Yeah, there's two things that I wanted to bring up. The first thing I'd like to bring up is the issue with the adult use ordinance and the Urban Area Planning Commission. I would like to ask them in some way to expedite to the best of their abilities the discussion on the adult use ordinance. Given that the time frame that we've been working on this, I want to see them prioritize this. I would like to see them either have a special meeting, adjust schedules appropriately or otherwise without, directly saying what day and what discussion topic. I would just like a general ask of them to expedite that conversation.
And this is based on your research that we can encourage them to have a special meeting, or do we require them to have a special meeting?
Yeah, I think it would be, I'm not sure about whether we can or cannot, but one thing to be sure, it would be high-handed of us to try to mandate when and at what topic they would discuss this. So I think it'd be more appropriate if council wouldn't mind to just asking that they expedite that from one policy board to another.
Yeah, council can provide direction to staff to try to coordinate with the UAPC to have to hold a special meeting in this situation. That would be sooner than the May 26th meeting. And so staff would work on getting a quorum at a date sooner than the scheduled date. We would have to renotice it because it is a public hearing that's been continued to date certain. So we'll need to do that renoticing also once we find out. But we could do that. I would just need direction from council to have us start to try to make a quicker date.
How much time in advance needs to be renoticed for that?
I think that it's just a normal, I don't know, noticing it because it's a continued public hearing. I'm not sure if there's any special notice or not. I think it still just might be 24 hours, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look into it.
Okay. Is there council interest in asking UAPC to have a special meeting for consideration of the adult business before their standard May 26th meeting? I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands. Okay, well, if you could.
I have another question about that.
Okay.
It was my understanding when I talked that they had been given the permission to get started working on the building, and then they were told that they had to stop working on the building. I'm not quite sure how that happened or why that happened. If it wasn't approved in the first place, why they would be given the direction to start and then being given the direction to stop. So could I get some clarity on that, please?
Hang on. First, let's go ahead and ask them to do a special meeting before
Certainly.
we lose track of that topic. Do you want to answer any questions about their building permits?
I could do a really quick answer on that. So we have not provided any permission to, there's been no applications that have been approved. Technically, we can't currently approve any applications for that site because the use that is going into that site is technically not allowed at this time. It'd be like us processing a permit for an In-N-Out burger to go right next to you, Valerie. That would make no sense, and we wouldn't process that application because it's not an allowable use. And so until some things change, that needs to happen. So I can provide you with more information after the meeting. We can have further discussion on that, but I have already checked into this, and the city is above board doing whatever they can to make things happen for certain individuals in the community, but we've got to make sure that we do it legally.
Rick?
So in the notice of looking at holding a special meeting for the Urinary Planning Commission, I would hope that the lead time would be more than 24 hours, like might be 1 week, because I feel on the issue of transparency and having people be knowledge of what's occurring, especially when a change is occurring from the original date, more than 24 hours would be appreciated. Thank you.
I think at this point, the ball is in their hands, along with staff, to set their own date. It's just a request on our part. All right, anything else? DJ?
I have one more request. It's come to my attention from research and otherwise that I'm reasonably certain there are businesses currently operating in Grants Pass that are in violation or non-compliance otherwise of the adult use ordinance. For many reasons, including the two-way street, some discretionary percentage exercised by the former community development director, some approvals that we've actually recently done. And I would like to direct staff to conduct an investigation into businesses that may be non-compliant with the adult use ordinance. I don't think an exhaustive list of every single business that could possibly be non-compliant would be appropriate at this time. The purpose of this would be to demonstrate that there are in fact businesses that are non-compliant, that I'm reasonably certain there are. So the ask for this would be to direct staff to investigate that.
And create a memo on that, or?
Yeah, this is for informational purposes. I don't really see a reason to come to have an official meeting, but yes, a memo in response would be appropriate, I believe.
All right, is there council interest on a memo that looks at the different ways in which certain adult businesses are allowed to operate? I'm seeing yes from 3 hands that way and 2 hands this way, 5 at least. Do you have any questions about that? No? Okay. Any other ideas, topics, things to add to the agenda? Okay. In that case, I will entertain a motion to adjourn to Wednesday night. Brian?
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, see you Wednesday night.